Let's start with Guardians. I normally like to end on the movie reviews, but I kind of feel like it's themed this week, which I also feel to a certain degree is kind of planned. That like there's a staging in media, as it were, where
Sure.
like you know they create media that obviously takes a year in advance, and then just so
Hmm.
happens that like things in the media happen to correspond with media, like with movies and things, and now
It is kind of weird. I mean, in general, people have an innate need to seek out patterns, but sometimes it does seem a little contrived.
right. I mean, I think it's the whole idea of like when you're in high school and like you would read whatever book in English lit, and then it like directly relates to your life somehow.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah. Of course, then I think that like you just have breakup stories and like things about dealing with your parents, and like every kid's dealing with that at that age.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that's also. I mean, I think any teacher who's been a teacher for more than like 2 years is like, I know exactly what's gonna happen every year. 'Cause it happens every year. Like somebody's gonna break up and somebody's parent is gonna whatever.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
Right, right. So Guardians of the Galaxy, I feel like is one of those films where when I was watching it in theaters, it was fairly packed as a theater.
Yeah,
A lot of laughing. I thought it was a hysterically funny film.
it really was.
It's very irreverent humor, and it's almost a nihilistic form of humor, which I feel like the director has just dove in headfirst into nihilism. I know you didn't see the new Suicide Squad. You keep telling me I saw the old one, and I'm like, that's not the new one. So like just from our conversations, I know you haven't seen it.
No.
But that movie was nihilistic to the nines. Like it was just irreverence. Like the two big jokes in that film was that they have a first Suicide Squad that all dies, and
Sure.
they're the decoy for the second one, but you don't know that until they're all dead and they all die horribly.
Oh gosh.
And that's the opening of the film is them all dying
Fantastic.
horribly. And then the second one is that the real Suicide Squad ends up like infiltrating this like military encampment and killing everyone, and then at the last person they realized that was their contact, the people that they were supposed to meet to whatever.
Perfect.
Right, like it's nihilism
Right.
to the nines, where like anything can be funny, and we're just pushing the envelope of like
Sure.
nihilism, which I feel like that kind of humor, while obviously not in an R-rated sense, whereas that film had been, it's still the same worldview to a certain extent.
Yeah, I can see that.
Where I feel like the first couple of Guardians didn't have that as much. Like I feel like Gunn is just, the writer director
Right, right.
is just kind of going in that direction. I also feel like one of the biggest criticisms I had, I read a couple of reviews last night on it because I was very conflicted on what I thought about it. Because like, yes, it's a very well made and enjoyable film, but like I feel like it tries to be deep enough that like I want to take it seriously in what it's trying to say.
Sure.
Which what it's talking about is genocide and like authoritarianism
Yes.
and like
It
kind of the
does
final
have.
solution, a lot of Nazi parallels.
Well, it's very. At face level, it's not heavy.
Right.
But it. Like,
I
afterwards,
don't
you're
know.
like.
I don't know how like face level it wouldn't be.
Well, because this is what I mean is that, I mean, we were talking about genocide, like whole planets and civilizations being systematically created
Right.
and destroyed. But, like, the movie is so enjoyable that, like, it's almost forgettable. Like,
Right. The nihilism is so overpowering.
yeah, like, it trivializes it to such a degree that you're like, huh, I should have taken that more seriously, and I was
Sure.
laughing. So it's a kind of weird dichotomy.
Yeah, I mean, like the dichotomy is definitely there in terms of the idea that like Gunn kills people that are not main characters so frivolously
Right.
that like it almost becomes such a gag, and then you're supposed to care about other characters, and he like is going back between like nothing matters to this really matters.
Yes.
So like millions dying when the planet blows up, while obviously not a good thing, is done for laughs. While like there are main characters in Rocket's past that die that you're really meant to see their
Yeah.
humanity on. And there's way more parallels to like an Auschwitz type of situation with those people, which obviously isn't played for laughs, but there is it feels very jarring where like I can laugh at people suffering to like, oh, I'm supposed to really take this seriously. It's a very jarring thing, and I feel like it works because part of comedy is like tension and release.
Yes.
So like he builds tension with the serious, and then he does something so irreverent in the comedy that like you need that release, but then when you leave the theater, it's a very much so like, what was I just laughing at, or like
what was so funny, or what was the meaning? Right. Yeah, because that's actually what I was thinking about this morning. So we saw the movie last night.
Sure.
And what I was thinking about this morning is that I don't want to say that it's forgettable in the sense that I forgot the entire movie. Mm-hmm. It's just really hard to pinpoint any specifics because the whole movie is very fluctuating between serious and comedy and importance right. and frivolousness. And so it's not that it's forgettable, it's just hard to rationalize maybe.
Well, it's hard to get a through line because it feels like so many things are disjointed that when you try and, like, the way your memory works is you almost want to think of things as a narrative.
Right.
Like as a cohesive thing with like a theme and whatever, and like, yes, if you go back and rewatch something a bunch of times, as we tend to do, you'll like pull out scenes that were important to you, or like right. even when you're watching it. But like typically when you watch most movies, it's a cohesion thing, or you'll just remember one part that was cool. But I think there's movies like that too, where the movie sucks, but they have that one great scene.
Yeah, which ends up on TikTok. Right. Just the one scene.
Just the one scene. But I feel like with this one, there's a lot of great scenes, but there's also some weird scenes. The other thing that I've heard a lot of criticism online about is how the tone is too silly. That the humor was, not justified, and that like it doesn't take anything seriously. And I feel like I can appreciate how that undercuts the thematics and the story structure. However, the humor is my sense of humor. I feel like that's going to be results will vary based upon your sense of humor. I like the characters. I didn't like Nebula that much in this film.
She was weird.
She was so bossy, and it was really weird because, so first thing, one of the characters that I really liked was Gamora in the first two films, and like they go out of their way so much to make her unlikable in this film, and like she betrays them, but it never really comes out. It just feels like a throwaway.
Yeah, like that was weird to me that she 100% betrays them. But I want to say that the director didn't want to throw her under the bus because she betrays them, but even her own character doesn't right. know that she betrayed them, which I feel like based on the voice and like over the, the communicator, I feel like she should have known, or that there should have been some kind of passcode. Like,
I feel like the issue was they needed Adam Warlock there, and they couldn't really figure out how to get him there. So it was really more of well, how do we do that? Well, maybe Gamora makes a thing, and it was there's a lot of things like that where things feel very shoehorned.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is the least cohesive and the least the most amount of plot holes that feel how does this and this make sense? We're just going to cram this in to and it doesn't feel very organic. So I feel that I think that as James Gunn has been getting bigger in stature and profile, he's had less and less restrictions and red tape and collaborations forced on him. So I think sometimes, while I've generally enjoyed his films in the past, I could see where he maybe needs somebody to reel him in a little bit. You know what
Sure.
I mean? Having somebody to answer to. Because I think a lot of times when you have 2 or 3 really large successes like he's had, that, what most creative people want is no control. They always feel like their film would have been better had, they not had to jump
let
through.
Me do whatever I want.
Right. But then you end up having the issue of there's no structure, which leaves the audience feeling what the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like the whole thing, the appeal mm-hmm. to the Guardians of the Galaxy is that they are kind of a organic group in mm-hmm. that they didn't plan to be a group. They just kind of
sure.
assembled as they went, and they're supposed to
right.
be kind of bumbly in that they kind of they loosely plan, but they mostly just fumble and like bumble
Right.
their way through. Where I see in this movie the attempt, and it usually comes off as very organic, at least in the other two films. But in this one, the fumble bumble
Feels a little
organic
forced.
felt very forced.
I also think, for me at least, like, I don't know, like, there was just so many contrived things with that, yeah, like, I'm just, like, trying to think back to it, and it's like there's so many things that didn't feel like they needed to be there. And, like I said, I like everybody's personality, but, like, I feel like it's one of those movies that, like, so many plot holes. And here's the other thing is I feel like Guardians is a much Marvel adjacent of a franchise. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, other than their... I mean, I think it's weird in the sense that, like, yes, they were in some of the Avengers films. And because they're in the Avengers films, we now have plot points from the Avengers that you need. But I think of all of the Marvel movies, I feel like this is the most auteur theory or auteur, authorship of a person in Gunn than any of them. Like, there were several directors that they brought on early on to develop films, and they almost fired all of them to a man. Like, even the director that started it with Iron Man, like, he's still a character, but he has nothing to do with it. Like, he's even written a film about, someone stealing his idea as a parody. So, like, I feel like it's very studio assembled films.
Right.
And what they really want is somebody who is a technician rather than an author.
Sure.
To, like, we need somebody to, pace it all together and somebody to be there on set and make sure that, everything's running, but we don't really need your input.
Yeah, it feels very much like the ghostwriter feel of,
Right.
like, the ghostwriter, insert studio here,
Right.
has already written it. We just need you to do it.
Right.
Like, don't add, don't subtract. We just need...
Yeah, we've already gone through our panel of, like,
Yeah.
What do you call it? Like,
the board.
the board,
Yeah.
and, like, it's been tested with an audience, and this is, we've manipulated the human mind to this is what's going to trigger all the responses we want. Go forth and
Yeah.
produce.
Sure, it's the same thing in the music industry, where
Sure.
they're like, these 4 chords work,
Right.
this beat works,
This is what's trending right now.
Yeah.
You need to wear these clothes and
Yeah.
say these words at this whatever.
cadence,
Right.
and we're bound to have a pop song.
Right. And
Yeah.
I want to say it's like 80 or 90% of all songs are written by like 10 people or something like that.
Sure.
In the mainstream. And then within that, like, it makes you think, like, if all the songs are written by the same 10 people, then really who the artist is doesn't exist because there's no authorship to the song. It's not
Right.
their song.
They're the
And-
singer.
But, like, the 10 people realize that you need a certain facade to buy that idea. So we're going to make them dress like this so it touches these emotional chords. And I feel like that's very much been happening with Disney in general. I mean, before we get into the rest of this, I will say this. I remember watching the commercials before the movie, and just every time it was like the hardest groan. And it was the whole audience, I feel like, was just...
For
like,
Guardians?
well, the trailers, like the
Yeah.
coming attractions. So, I mean, Oppenheimer, I feel like, was the best received, though it's a little stark in terms of what the trailer is. I still want to see it.
I do want to see it. Well, I'm a biopic person, so...
Right. But then you had Indy, which the rumors have been so hard on what's going to happen with that one. Like, there was a bunch of leaks that, like, the whole reason they're going back in time is to kill off Indy and have the woman become Indy and relive all of his adventures starting from young Indy. So they're going to kill young Indy and old Indy, and then they're going to replace it with a woman, and she's going to be called Indy in respect to him, and they're going to have a female-led Indy Anna Jones.
Well, we've talked about this in previous podcasts where we're like, look, we're done with the requels and the sequels and the whatever.
Right.
Like, make your own new thing.
Right.
If you...
I mean, like, here's the thing. Like, on its face, a woman in the 1920s being a archaeological Tomb Raider-esque type.
Sure.
I mean, like, there's a reason Tomb Raider worked.
Yes.
Like, it was its own property and people enjoyed it. I mean, I feel like what's kind of gone south with that is they dumb the movies down and they've rebooted it to be even dumber. But like the original ones that were really famous, like they were really popular for a reason, and I feel like you could definitely see the Indiana Jones inspiration there.
Sure.
But I don't think anyone was like groaning like, "Oh, how dare you!" But when you're going to take Indiana Jones and that IP and totally like butcher it and make it something new, when I feel like if you just, because like I believe Tomb Raider is modern day ish.
Yeah, well,
Right.
Tomb Raider is definitely not older than I'd say the 60s
Right.
or 70s. It doesn't give a time frame on purpose, I feel like.
I feel like some of the gadgets are very modern, so I don't know if that's true. But like the idea of like the original two Mummy movies, where
Right.
you had both the Harrison Ford type and I can't remember the name of the actor. You also had Rachel Weisz there as the female, and it almost felt like Tomb Raider and Indy together,
Right.
and that worked, and
That
it was
works
also
great.
from that era.
Right.
Like I'm not like again like in theory it doesn't have to be bad, but like shoehorning the Indy idea there, it's like the people who think that's a good idea, they're going to shove in enough other bullshit into it, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
That like I know it's going to suck.
Yes.
So again, like it worked in Tomb Raider, it worked in The Mummy.
To
The
make
first
a
two.
new thing.
Make a new thing.
Like it's fine. You don't. If you want to kill off Indy because you want to make a new thing, then just make the new thing. But don't murder Indiana Jones in the process.
Because I feel like that's what they did with Star Wars. Like you have to kill off the old to make the new look good by comparison. And it's like people like us who grew up on the old. Like you may like in order to kill Harrison Ford in the new Star Wars, they had to make him a deadbeat dad that ran away from his kid, and he's a piece of shit, and like he regresses as a character completely.
Yes.
And then we have to murder him.
Yes.
Horribly on screen, so that you can like other characters that suck, like.
But I feel like it's also a generational thing, like the claimed generational trauma of like. My parents were all deadbeats, and I had to raise myself. This is the
best that I had, and then you end up being the Adam Driver character.
Yeah, so now you're just going to put it in the movie as the, like, shared generational trauma, and I'm like, well, that's well, great and fine for you, but, like, why...
Right.
Like,
you're basically telling our entire generation that we're pieces of shit. Like,
yeah.
I mean, they did the same thing to Luke Skywalker, which everyone agreed to. You know, that he's just this hermit drinking blue milk and, like... being a
crazy ass person on a whole planet by himself.
Right. I mean, just total degenerate, not redeemable in any way. But the new cast, they're the ones.
They're the ones.
Yeah, they're not gonna make any of the same mistakes.
No, not at all.
No. Yeah, they're perfect. I mean, Mary Jane over there. But no, like I feel like that's the problem. There was a couple of other horrible movies that looked.
Oh, well, the reason why you don't remember them is because they all looked horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it started with Oppenheimer, then there was, all I'm thinking about is the trailers that are out now, like Mario, which is...
Yeah. I don't remember any of the trailers. I just remember looking at and I'm like, I would rather die.
Like, I would gouge my eyes out. Like,
right.
There was, we talked about Indiana Jones.
Right.
There was the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles one. That we saw the poster for, but not the trailer.
Right, but like I believe in that one that April is now a black lesbian and one of the turtles is trans, and it's like what the fuck? Like just like why call it Ninja Turtles? Like why can't you can't? Because here's the thing.
Can you call it like Teenage Mutant Ninja Monkeys? Like any other animal, just make your own new thing.
Right. I mean like because here's the thing. If they came out with Teenage Mutant Trannies. Like, no one's going to fucking go to that. So, like, what they're expecting is for parents to be like, it's Ninja Turtles. And they send their kids in without watching, or the parents go in with them. And then you're a bigot for saying anything.
Or for leaving. How dare you?
Right.
How dare you leave in the middle of a film?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was watching Crowder this morning, and he was, like, saying that there's this new thing where, like, they're doing this... tranny like show for kids, and they said ages 3 and up, and it's like 2.5 is way too fucking young for this. I understand, way to have standards.
Yeah,
like 2.5, that's gross, but 3, and it's like that sort of.
So you know why they pick 3?
Why?
We talked about this in our last podcast, because now you can send your kids to school as early as 3 years old. So if it were me and I were putting age limits on things,
right,
saying that it's appropriate for 3-year-olds,
Right.
knowing that 3-year-olds can be in Head Start programs, that to me makes total sense.
Anyway, we're getting way off the track of Guardians of the Galaxy.
We are.
So anyhow, there's a lot to unpack here because I feel like anytime you bring in Nazism or Nazi type of regalia,
Sure.
here's the thing: is most people don't know what the fuck the Nazis were, what they did. Like we know the end result. I feel like, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, where we're trying to get away from that part of history, so you can call Nazis anything. Like we know the Nazis were bad, generally speaking, and we know the Nazis killed the Jews. Which again, like I'm Jewish, so like that's nobody's saying that's a good thing,
Right?
But we've made them out. The only other thing that's widely known or widely talked about is that they are quote unquote from the right. Like that has become this thing, and it's like, one, no, they weren't. They were socialists.
They were socialists.
Two, when you look at modern socialism or modern leftism, again, like it's carbon copies of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And three, when you read Mussolini, who was Hitler's compatriot from Italy, he wrote a lot about the necessity of socialism and the necessity of having the government control production as a function there. So really what you're talking about is totalitarianism.
Right.
And when you talk about totalitarianism, you get all of the tragedies of the 20th century and beyond.
Sure.
Like ever since Marx wrote his writings, and people, again, we've talked about this too, saying you have to be really smart to think of things so stupid.
Right.
It's this idea that you can be above.
You're above it all.
You're above it all. You're above the idea of like nature or science or anything else. So you create your own science and you create your own ideas.
You're evolved. You've evolved beyond the normal human. Sure.
Right. So, that is the idea that Nazism came from. The only real difference between them and what the Communist Party did is the Nazis and Mussolini and the Japanese, if we really want to get technical, they believed in the superior of themselves and that they could create superiority through genetics, through weeding out negative traits and things of that nature. And the difference between that and the the Soviet model is they believed in weeding out successful traits because that was what the underclass was jealous of. So it became a more popular idea that, we talked about the Ukrainian breadbasket, that, the Ukrainian farmers that farmed basically for all of Europe and the Soviet nations, or the, Russian, Slavic nations, that because they were so wealthy from learning a skill, that they murdered them all and then starved. Like, it's the idea that you're trying to get rid of things to be jealous of rather than getting rid of negative traits. But anytime that you're trying to dictate from a top-down authoritarian stance of what society should look like, you're going to get travesty.
Right, and that's exactly what this movie does again and again and again, because it basically shows a singular person going through this process repetitively,
right,
and getting, we'll say, marginally better results each time, but he habitually creates a society, collapses it, destroys it, and starts again.
Right.
And it's very, I forget the name of the doctor, the
one from the movie?
No, the Nazi doctor who
The Angel of Death is what it was called. Menheim? I can't remember.
Yeah, it starts with an M. Anyways.
Yeah, I can't think of it.
Off the top of my head. But yeah, like it's very that guy where he's like, I'm going to take creatures and genetically torture them. And
for
then
the good of science.
For the good of science.
Well, like the thing is like we had Operation Paperclip where we took all of those scientists and took their results from the U.S. or to the U.S., so yeah, like it's really weird. I think also people don't realize just how much of the occult was in Nazism. Yes,
I think. I mean, at least when I went to school, it was fairly evident. Like,
well, I think what's going on now is there are two things which are kind of shown in proportion, which is one that they were a Christian nation. So like there's the the conflation of Nazism and Christianity has become a new thing.
I am totally unaware of that.
Yeah, and
That's
two,
mind blowing.
and the second one is that the reason they killed the Jews is because of the Jews killing Christ. So therefore, that was their justification.
Again, totally mind blowing, because that was not when I was going to school. That was not it. It was very much a genetic cleansing of,
Sure.
We're looking for superior Aryan race.
Right.
We are weeding out bad characteristics, which if you actually go back and look at Nazi propaganda,
Right.
the even the pictures, like the propaganda pictures that they would, the cartoons, political cartoons they would draw, I mean, the Jews would look absolutely hideous. Right. As compared to very, beautifully classical Aryan.
Sure. I mean, I think that when you look at any war, you typically have, like what we did with the caricatures of the Germans in World War One and Two, and then the Japanese, like they're very
Right.
subhuman. Because anytime that you're going to be asked to kill, you have problems with that
Right.
historically. I mean, there's actually a really interesting paper that Napoleon wrote, and the reason why he had so much artillery had nothing to do with it being technically more proficient. Here's basically what he said: if you're far enough away, you'll fire at a target that's a location that's just a coordinate. Because you won't look at a person, but if you have to get close enough with a rifle to aim
And
at them,
look at them in the eye,
most people won't fire. So he wanted to take the individual's decision to kill out of the equation, and that's why he favored artillery so much, because it took the humanity out of combat. So anytime that you're going to have guerrilla warfare and fighting one-on-one, it's really actually difficult to get people to kill each other. On scale. So, of course, like any time that you have warfare or killing that needs to be done, you're going to, dehumanize your enemy. And I think what most people don't know from history is the banks really fucked the German people after World War One.
yes,
They really, really did. And I'm not trying to justify, Holocaust or whatever. But when the Germans were coming to power, or the Nazis, when the Nazis were coming to power in Germany, you wanted someone to blame. And when you look at dictatorships historically, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take something that's a sore subject, and in this case it's the scapegoat. The banks fucked us. The Jews run the banks.
Yes.
Let's get the Jews because they're not one of us, the Germans.
Right.
And it's something to unite with because... it's one of those things where...
It's the common enemy.
It's the common enemy.
Sure. I mean, that's a very human psychology.
Right.
You can get any group of people to rally as long as they have a common enemy.
Right.
They don't even need to get along.
Right.
Sure.
So, I think I understand it. I understand what he was doing. The other part is Hitler himself was part Jewish, which is always funny.
I mean, if you actually look at the the actual story, and it is very ironic.
Right. So by no means am I saying pro Hitler, but when you look at his rise to power, one, he was not Christian. He did do passions where the Jews were portrayed very badly. As a means of dehumanizing them. But the SS and the upper ranks of the Nazis really were heavily into the occult. We're doing blood rites and sacrifices and all sorts of demonic shit. I don't think Christianity and conflation, I think that he was using Christianity, which was heavily adopted in Germany at the time, as a means of convincing people and riling up emotions, saying that the Jews killed Christ is a, emotional ploy, but I don't see this as a, the average Christian wanting to hurt Jews. I find that there's either a strong divide with Christians to Jews a strong ignorance or a strong like. I've almost never heard hatred. Just from my own personal whatever.
Well, anti-Semitic is like a super worse bad insult. Like you don't want to be anti-Semitic. Like that's a cancel culture will come in.
Right. I mean, I feel like the people who are the most racist when it comes to that are the people who are the most evolved. And I'll give you an example of this, and I was going to get to this later, so I'm kind of going back and forth between Guardians and all the other topics I was wanting to get to today.
Sure.
Which is kind of a weird thing that everything ties together. This is going to be the longest movie review in history. But, so, one of the other things that I saw that's been coming out lately is American women, liberal women of the United States, are mad at men for finding wives out of the country, for going to, like, more traditional countries and finding women who want a family, who want a home, who want to like raise the children and be, not feminazis who cut their hair short and scream about like, if you don't like trans women, then you're a bigot. Like, all the shit, like men are like, fuck this. I just want a family and come home and like have a dinner ready.
Yeah.
And, like,
can I just have, dinner and pie, please?
Yeah. And like, you're going to take care of my kids and not try and like chop their dicks off when they're 4 years old. Like,
or marry me for money.
Right. Right. So now there's this huge movement recently that's been going through where they're saying these poor men who are taking advantage of these stupid, uneducated women who are too dumb to stand up for themselves. And they're too uneducated because if they were educated, they'd be woke like us. So now, the problem with all these women is men don't want anything to do with woke females. Like, this feminazi bullshit, like, most men, like, maybe they tried it once, they lost half their shit in a divorce, and they're like, never the fuck again.
Never again.
Never the fuck again. And now the women are alone, and they're bitter, because no one wants to deal with their shit. And it's these brown women, these Asian women that are traditional, they're just not smart like us educated white girls. And, like, they don't understand the racism. I mean, like here's the thing.
It's always funny to me when people say something.
Right.
Like, oh, well, those poor brown people, they just don't know any better. And I'm like...
Thank you, elevated white person.
Yeah, like... I mean, did you hear what you said? Because what I heard was, I'm a racist asshole.
Yeah.
Who, just... That to me it's astounding to me when people say things like that, because they will also simultaneously go, well, I can't be racist. My mom is Mexican, and I'm like,
well, my favorite thing that I hear from white ladies now when they say racist shit that I call them on, I can't be racist. I fuck black guys.
Oh God.
That's a real thing that's going on between women. If I suck a black dick, I can't be racist. I can do anything I want, be horrible as a human being, but I can't be racist if I fuck black dudes.
I mean, that doesn't even make sense. Like, that does not make sense. It just doesn't. Like, I mean, here's my honest take on people who say racist shit and then back it up with a credential. And there is nothing that you can do, say, or act in any kind of way that will give you a credential to be racist. Because that's really what you're saying. You're saying, I am accredited to be racist because I have fulfilled a goal. So the racism board certified me to be racist because I dated a black guy, or because I married a Mexican, or because I whatever, like insert credential criteria.
Well, I remember there was a girl that I was friends with who was kind of a lefty, and I was trying to do business with her on she was into capitalist, and we were trying to get a thing going. But at the time I was dating a black girl, and like she was really into black men. But, like, politically, like, I'm fairly libertarian. And she would say that my politics were racist. I'm like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Libertarian, what does that have to do with anything? And I've since actually heard that there is some racist libertarians. And there's also some like anti-women libertarians, like those are subsects, and like I've
sure, but that's
writing.
in any political group
sure.
you're going to have.
Sure, and like I'm just acknowledging that exists, but the idea that the reason I didn't want to pay taxes to the government, or that I wanted lower taxes and lower government, is because I wanted money to not go to poor people who are like majority black. So therefore, I'm a racist for wanting lower taxes for business incentives and things of that nature to help people. Even though I think that would actually help the lower communities. I mean, we were just talking earlier today that like when you talk about the George Floyd riots, it literally, because they happened in predominantly black neighborhoods, you had all of those spending bills that Trump pushed down to try and help black areas and black business owners getting burned to the ground in effigy, and no one giving a shit about these people who were trying to bring commerce and stability to these neighborhoods. That wasn't talked about. And they were actually targeted largely by BLM. So you had fucking white chicks who would fucking slum it down to the fucking black neighborhood because we fuck black dudes, so we can't be racist, firebombing black businesses. Yeah. Because Trump gave them that money, and Trump's a Nazi, so therefore we can firebomb this black business.
It doesn't make sense. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
I saw a clip on TikTok. I wish I could remember the comedian's name. So he's a white dude, and he's in the middle of his skit, and he's saying, you know, like a black guy came up to me and was like, you're racist because you're a white comedian over here talking about the ghetto. What do you know? And he's like, why are you yelling at me? Like, he's like, I grew up in the projects next to you. Like, some rich guy has both of our shit. Like, I'm just as poor as you are. Like, why are you even yelling at me for?
Sure. I didn't steal your shit. Yeah.
I didn't. Yeah. He's like, I didn't steal your shit. Like, trust me, if I stole your shit, I wouldn't be living next door to you. Right. Like, that's stupid.
Right. So, getting back to Guardians here, like, there's the whole idea of like, there's this top-down authoritarian angle, and it's definitely tended to Nazis. But then there was some subtle keys that like wokeism is the way to like skirt that with love and accepting everyone. And it's like, I don't think that means what you think it means.
Yeah, I mean, so towards the end of the movie, they're saving, you know, without giving all the spoilers. Sure. I mean, the whole point of Guardians of the Galaxy is that they save the galaxy. Right. So without giving away spoilers, they're doing the thing where they save the galaxy. Right? And then they say, well, I thought we were only saving, like, the upper class galaxy, we'll call it, right? And he's like, well, no, we have to save all of the galaxy. And then there's that second flood of characters that get saved, right? And that to me was very, like, that was a weird kind of thing, because I was like, yes, you want to save everybody, but you also... Like, can you save everybody and everything? And it goes back to the, like, if everything is important, then nothing is important.
Sure, and I definitely agree with you there. And I think a lot of how I read into that, and it's not obtuse in the film, like, it's not plain, but I think a lot of what they're talking about is, like, the third world and things of that nature. And here's my thing on this. By and large, America is the most giving nation on earth, both in terms of government, but also just in terms of people donating money. And the majority of the people who donate their own money are conservatives, because there's a belief in God, that there is goodness in the world, and that you're going to be judged on what you do, and that you should take care of your fellow man.
Also, just in the sense that if you have surplus, that if you're taken care of and you have surplus, then the thing to do with it is to give.
Correct. I completely agree with that. However, you know, like, there's parables in the Bible about if you run across a man who's starving on the street and you do nothing, you know, like, you don't care about him, and, you know, that's whatever. But here's the thing, right? Like, if I give all of my money away to the poor people of the world, and I send it to Africa and whatever, and that goes into just the sucking hole that is, you know, lack of infrastructure in some of the third world. Right. Now I'm starving, so now someone has to take care of me. Right. So a lot of times, like taking care of yourself, making sure your family's taken care of, and then taking care of your neighbor, and because here's the thing: when you have stability, you can then project that outward.
Sure.
Because we have, we were just talking about how there has been a creation to have the United States lack stability. I'm willing to bet that we would be helping more people and be able to if we were stronger and more firm in being able to take care of ourselves. Like you need to be able to save yourself before you can save someone else. And sometimes you have to let the other person drown if they're not willing to accept help.
Sure. Well,
So,
it's the airplane thing.
or
When the airplane, it says very clearly when all
right,
the masks comes down, and
right,
I love that they use a picture of a mom.
uh-huh,
I really do. Like that's just not a lie.
right,
Because the thing for a mom to do is to put the mask on the kid first.
right,
And they're like, you have to put it on yourself first because
right,
you will die and then the kid will die.
right,
So put it on yourself first. And to use your analogy, like let's say you're helping an adult person
uh-huh,
and they're shoving the mask off, then okay, fine. Like I'm not going to help you.
right,
Like I put it on myself.
right,
I tried to help you because I saw you were struggling.
right,
You don't want my help. Okay, well, like that's on you. Like
sure,
I will then tend to the next person.
right.
Like
Yeah, and I think there's also just a triage of who you can help and what have you, and you can't save everybody. Like the Bible is very clear in terms of saying there will always be poor people, and
yep.
it's based upon human nature that people will always be lazy. There will always be people who are not willing to help themselves or not willing to take help, and sometimes that help is learn how to work, learn how to manage things, learn how to manage yourself. So I definitely think that when you deal with the third world, you know, it's a funny dichotomy because on one hand, I think that the stronger we are as a nation, the more we can help other people. But what ends up being talked about when you talk about companies and corporations and whatever is how they prey upon people.
Sure.
So, where I would go with that is if you have a large corporation, like a mega corporation, and you have the slave laborers who are being exploited in these countries, and they just kind of perpetuate these things. Largely, the reasons why those corporations exist is because of top-downness. Like you've created regulations, you've pushed for these incentive programs for these mega corporations to exist. Most small companies don't exploit anyone.
That's true. And except themselves.
Right.
Sure.
Right, and like I just think about like the sweatshops, and I always think of Nike when I think of this, even though like I know there's it's everybody.
Yeah, it's everybody. I think it's just because there was like a big movement about that when we were younger, so it's just one of those things.
Right,
that,
like it was
got
on the
stuck
news.
in our head.
But like really, who I think about is Apple, because
Sure.
like Apple, it has horrible conditions for the people over there,
Yep.
and yet. If you look at Apple TV and you look at their politics and you look at what they push out in terms of messaging, it's all of this wokeism and how corporations are hurting people and how you have to stand up for it.
It's very virtue signaling.
But buy our products, even though we're absolutely 100% in that.
Yeah.
In that group of companies that exploit.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Right. So, but at the same time, they want to paint Nazism as this thing, and they're like, we'll bring all the people here. It's all about voting and getting money away from corporations, because the more poor people that you bring here, the more that you can trick them into democratically voting to get the successful people's money, so you can destabilize that, and you can have more and more mega corporations and less regulation. Like, I don't think that it's designed to help people from most of these countries and most of these blocks. And the other part of that is one of the things that we don't do, which I actually think would not be the worst, is going down and getting rid of a large part of these cartels, a large part of these puppet governments. Because, you look at like, we want to save Latin Americans or Mexicans for that matter. Like, what's the number one problem in Mexico? The cartels, 100%. Like there's no number one thing. Like Mexicans are hardworking people. However, you don't have any stable. Like in order for there to be stabilization for any economy to work, you have to have rights and property rights. Because why would I ever go and invest in a Mexican corporation if there's a thought that it's even possible that a corporation could go take my investment,
Sure.
and that the government body is just going to be like, we see nothing.
Yeah.
So, your life savings that you just put into our investment has gone bye-bye.
Sure.
And then you had, there was a thing recently where I want to say it was in Cancun, where they had a lot of murders and they were the cartels were kidnapping people, and then all of a sudden no one wants to go to fucking Cancun anymore.
Right.
And then all of a sudden the government's like, what the fuck are you doing? But if you don't have stability in your own safety and your own rights as both a human and your property, why would you ever invest down there? And if you don't have people investing and you don't have business and you don't have commerce, what the fuck are the people supposed to do? It doesn't matter how, you can work, but if no one's willing to pay you or give you currency on the basis that I have no expectation that I'm going to get a return for what I'm handing you money for, which is where the problem in Latin America is, largely. And you have these weird handshake deals with certain big corporations where a lot of manufacturing goes to Mexico. And I think of the coffee business in Colombia, where even the drug cartels know well, we shouldn't fuck with that. But even then, people who invest know that there's a little bit of greasing of the hands, that there's a little bit of corruption, the corruption tax that you're going to have to pay to get shit done, because again, you're dealing with cartels and things of that nature, and human trafficking. When we talk about slavery and things being done horrible to people, there's more slaves now than there's ever been in human history, and a large part of that is human trafficking. I think about.
Well, it's weird that what's weird is that we've made the word slave very, very bad. It is the worst curse word to accuse somebody of they commit slavery. That's you don't do that. But the idea of legal slavery and indentured servants and we're just gonna pay you a nickel. Sure. I mean, they're receiving a wage, but
if you want to say when we even think of the antebellum slaves, as we like to think of as the only slaves that ever existed. in history,
which is stupid.
But even when we think about them, they were giving housing, they were giving food, they were given they were allowed to live. They were given all the things that you work for. If you,
I'll bet a small amount of it.
Right.
I mean, they weren't given, let's say, pocket money.
Or good food.
Or good housing.
Right.
Or good plots of land. You know what I mean? Yes. I mean...
Right, but is the guy who's making your Apple or your iPhone, who's getting paid 5 cents an hour...
Exactly.
And who lives in
squalor.
In a one-bedroom apartment, or not even a one-bedroom, a one-room apartment with 20 family members.
Right.
What are they eating?
Exactly.
The fact that you think that they have the illusion to stop
is ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah.
They are, for all intents and purposes, slaves. They're communist slaves, and we're totally okay with it. And when you look at their employer, the answer is the people who buy the products, which, is the rich white Americans who...
Well, most people don't even know how the education system in, let's say, communist China works.
Right.
So... school is compulsory,
right.
So all the kids go to school and get this education, right? And it's supposed to be this world-class education because the standardized testing and blah blah blah, push for proficiency and everything else.
Right.
But what people don't realize is, the top, we'll say 1%,
sure,
get recognized for their efforts.
Right.
Do you know what happens to the other 99%?
They're pushing the factories.
They're pushing to factories, rice paddy farms.
Right.
So you have this incredible, thing that you worked for to educate your entire society, but yet 99% are sent back into the farm, and they're basically fucked for life.
Right.
Too bad, because
there's no upward
mobility. You're going to break your back.
Right.
Because you did not score in the top 1%.
Have you seen this new weird bullshit that they've got in communist China now? These headbands.
Headbands?
Yeah. So there's these headbands. They kind of remind me of the
Heron Bergeron.
Right, but it's for a different purpose. they can tell if you're paying attention or not. And if they're not, they turn bright red so the teacher can see that you're like zoning out. And then you're out of class.
Oh my gosh. I mean, can you imagine? Okay, so this was a thing that I learned. I say I learned, but I mean, who knows? It might have been a rumor.
Sure.
But I learned it when I was very young. Like, I want to say like in junior high and high school. And it was very much a like, you're so lucky to be in this country kind of thing.
Right.
That parents were basically so fearful of their kids not going to class or not learning, that let's say our daughter was sick that day. Right. So we live in China, our daughter is sick. And so I would actually go to school as her mother in her stead and sit in her seat and take all of her notes to bring them back to her because she could not be there. So like the society at large was supposed to just pretend to not notice that I was her mom. Like everybody was supposed to just pretend that I was like her, I was taking her place literally and figuratively. So that and I think you could do this for everything, like not an exam. Right. You know what I mean? But the idea was that, like, God forbid that you get behind because you're screwed.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just find the Chinese education system interesting, generally speaking.
Sure.
Because, I don't know, I took like a advanced course on Chinese history.
Okay.
And most people have no clue. Like, I remember, like, I was in class, like, with the professor being like, I've never heard any of this shit before. Like, this is so outside the norm. And he's like, look, and here's the weird part, is what I'm going to tell you. They don't even, like, they're almost not even allowed to teach this anymore because even though it's accurate, it's against what the communist Chinese say. So, therefore, it is offensive and you're insulting their culture.
Right, because it's unverifiable, so you're rumor milling.
Well, it's not even rumor milling. Like, everything I'm going to say is totally verifiable. It's just that it's being considered offensive to Chinese authoritarianism, so therefore, like, it's rude to teach something that makes them look bad.
Ah, okay.
So it's racist to tell the history of a huge nation.
Sure.
So, reasons.
Right.
So, essentially, like, you have to start out with Confucius, who everybody, like,
I'm aware.
Okay. Are you?
Yes, the philosopher.
Right, why is he important?
Because he was a good teacher, actually. Actually, now that I think about it, the only real thing that I know is that he was a teacher.
Okay, so here's what Confucius actually did that's important. He wrote a philosophy, but what he did when he was talking about said philosophy is he would use a past civilization as the character of the ultimate society.
Okay.
And they were known as the Zhou, and I believe it's Z-H-O or Z-H-O-U. I'm not 100% sure. I'm sorry, because you're dealing with amalgamation of...
Right.
Whatever. So he wrote about the Zhou as this idealized society. And then, like, he dies. And 200 years later, the Han Dynasty, the first, emperor, decides, I want to reestablish the Zhou Dynasty. The Zhou Dynasty never existed.
I was going to say, it never existed.
Never fucking existed. Like, he wrote about it the way that we would read it. Like current writers talk about, like, future dystopias or future worlds. It's like when you talk about Atlantis.
Or Middle Earth.
Sure. Middle Earth is a great example. So it would be like me saying, well, I need to conquer the world to bring Middle Earth together. Like, that's essentially what the emperor did. So he conquered and murdered a ton of people in order to, whatever. But, like, the current communist Chinese use like, you always hear about, like, China being 4,000 years old.
Right.
They're not. The Zhou were there 4,000 years ago. So they count this fictional...
So they count Middle Earth.
They count Middle Earth in their time.
Sure.
To whatever. So here's the thing, like, even the Han Dynasty, the first, like, Chinese emperor, only conquered about half of what China is today.
Okay.
And this is around about 2,000 years ago. Right. A little bit before, but, like, we're talking, like, Greece and a lot of other European things, because you always hear, like, how much older China is than whatever.
Yeah.
Bullshit.
Which I was going to say, it always kind of confuses me, because I'm like, how were they that far ahead?
They weren't. They're absolutely
and yet,
not.
Like, So what makes me like always kind of question that is not the like how are they that far ahead in the like
right society kind of thing.
Well,
Yeah.
you guys couldn't because nobody else was. It's not that. It's how are you that far ahead, but yet never
Conquered anyone
and
else.
yeah, that's my thing.
Because it's all bullshit.
Well, there you go.
It's 100% all bullshit. So then you had a period where that dynasty fell. So then you had like the southern part of the country, which was not conquered at all during the first time. They heard the Zhou bullshit. And then they conquered that. And then eventually they conquered the north. And then you had this huge disparate kingdom of people who were not one culture, didn't speak the same language.
Right.
And really, it was such a large period, like such a large thing, that they had a hard time ruling at all. With China. So like this idea that like China is all of this whatever old, like modern China is maybe like 1,000 years old, maybe 1,200.
Sure.
But like at most 2,000 if you count like a couple of kingdoms that fell 2,000 years ago.
Sure.
That were all based on bullshit. So like, I'm not saying this to be, mean towards Chinese people, but like it is the authoritarian lie of greatness.
Sure.
That they have.
That's the thing, though, about any kind of government that it does, any kind of government that is based on propaganda, socialism,
Right.
communism, totalitarianism. You get into this,
God
I
made me king, or I am God, like
sure,
the North Koreans
like
or whatever.
that is bizarre. The like I am God, that is really bizarre.
Right.
But it's the idea that you're above it all to such an extent that you're allowed to create your own narrative
Right.
and your own history.
Right.
Like I can just say whatever because I'm infallible.
Right.
What it is I have become so big I don't have to be humble.
Right.
And
there's no humble before God, and then you get
Right.
into the weirdest things that people do. Like, in North Korea, they actually believe this. I don't know if you've heard this before.
What?
The supreme leader, they believe that they are God. Like
Right, that they are
from
the
God.
actual...
And here's what they
yeah.
told people. They don't have a butthole because they don't need to poop. They eat,
Yes.
but they don't need to poop. Like, that, to me, is
bizarre.
Like, how fucked do you have to be as a human being to, like, straight up look somebody in the eye and be like, I don't have a butthole. I don't poop. Like you believe me, don't you?
But the response is always, yes, I believe you, because I will be shot, murdered, and dragged through the streets.
And my children will be tortured in front of me before I'm killed.
Yeah, like, so
Yeah.
ask me again that I believe you, because anything that I need to do to convince you that I believe you, I will do.
But it's the whole idea that you have to, like, make people drink the Kool-Aid to agree to things that the average person has to know is stupid. The average person has to know, but then, like, when you get through that level of accepting that much bullshit, because, like, I remember reading a thing about how, like, the communists and their propaganda, it isn't that everybody bought into it or believed it. It's that it's almost a threat.
Yeah.
That if we can print in the newspaper, the sky is purple.
Yeah.
And have...
Well, it's the arrogancy test. It's
right.
It's, I am so arrogant, I can tell you that apples are oranges.
Right.
And my lack of being humble.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then it's that innate human thing to always one up. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
if I can convince you the sky is purple, can I convince you that an apple is an orange? Can I convince you that I don't have a butthole? Like,
but, like,
it just
imagine
keeps going.
that you go to work, right? And, like, they just put in the newspaper, today, the sky is purple. And you're like, I don't want to say anything, but, like, what do I do? And then everyone at work's like, I never thought that the sky was purple before, but, now that you say
Now that you say it,
yeah, it really is, isn't it? And then you're like, yeah, because you're scared.
Yeah,
like,
well,
it's the idea that, like, and I felt this way during the last election. Like, it was so obviously rigged. It was so over the top, obviously rigged.
Yeah.
And, like, they told you that it was normal, and it was just so, like...
It's mind-boggling, because you're sitting next to your fellow man, and you're like, are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing?
Right.
And sometimes... in the right company,
right.
They're like, oh my God, yes, I see what you're seeing. But most of the time, they're like, no, I don't see what you're seeing.
So, like, you have Trump up by, like, 10 points in these states.
Right.
And then everyone is going to call it early. They send all of the overseers, the people who are going to ensure the election integrity. They send everyone home. In a couple of states, or in one state, they had like a water leak that they couldn't confirm.
Right.
And then the counters, after sending the verifiers home, were like, we'll stay. And then a lot of those states, we just found hundreds of thousands of votes. And
under my seat.
You
know, in the drawer,
There's
whatever.
pictures of people wheeling in carts of something into the voting stations at like 4 a.m, where like you have like the citizen journalist being like, what the fuck is going on?
Oh, yeah. Oh, we found this bag of mail-in votes.
Then you wake up in the morning and it's like, landslide for Biden. And you're like, what the living fuck? And then you have like those people who are like one afraid, being like, well, that's what it says, we're a democracy. And then you get like the really hardcore people who are like, well, you're just too stupid to not know how like mail-in voting works or something. And it's like, well, you should know that doesn't work, and that was like talked about for years as one of the the biggest things to destroy election integrity. But like the coup happened, which also was, what was it? Amazon can stay open and Walmart can stay open and it's fine, but mom and pop shop, you're killing people. If it kills one life.
Yeah, like you can go to a human rights rally.
Right, with other people. Because racism is really the real killer.
But you can't go to a political rally.
No.
Those are straight death.
No, Black Lives Matter, you can't catch the coup. It's science.
It's science.
But if you protest the coup for protests wearing masks, you're murdering people,
die.
And you should be, prosecuted for the death that you've caused for increasing the spread.
Yes.
I mean, it's just such like, if you can like stomach that as a human being, and like try and justify that. The sky's purple. I am your leader now. Send me your money. The address is below.
It's just ridiculous. Like, it really is. It's astounding to me how many people will just like continue.
Right.
And I really like watching those college debates where college kids will go up against a political speaker, and they're like, you're the cause of all the problems, and they're like, please explain this to me like I'm 5. And then you listen to the college kid, and they just get destroyed, and they're like, yeah, well, racism, and you're mean, and I'm like, okay.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think there's that. I also wanted to talk slightly about the big thing that we're talking about. Guardians of the Galaxy comes out, and then there's 2 shootings. There's one shooting and then like the driving, whatever. But
right, so both of them in Texas.
Both of them in Texas. That's why I'm conflating the two. But I really just wanted to get into the shooting because, he's a Nazi. He's a. I mean, they have a picture, and I don't know if it's been confirmed that he's black and Hispanic. He's definitely Hispanic, but like darker than you. Like, I'm not trying to like be whatever.
Sure.
But this, like, if you told me he was half black, half Hispanic, I'd believe you.
Sure.
So like this dude's darker than dark. Like there's no white supremacy rally on earth that's accepting this dude. I mean, it would be like the Dave Chappelle joke about the blind black guy who joins the Klan and then he takes his hood off and he divorces his wife.
Come on, man.
Divorces his wife for marrying a black guy because he's racist.
Yeah.
All the things like things we used to be able to make fun of in this country.
Yeah.
But yeah, this dude is that guy. If he's the world's worst white supremacist ever.
Or confused.
Or most confused, yes. So he apparently moved away from living in a predominantly black and Hispanic neighborhood.
Right.
He, like, a couple months before the shooting, moves to a white neighborhood and goes to a white mall and kills mostly white people because of how much he hates black people.
Again, this is the sky is purple, apples are oranges.
Right.
Like, we can just print whatever we want now because people will believe it, and if they don't, they're stupid for not believing it.
And like the crazy thing is there's supposedly their proof of this, that he's a white supremacist, is that they found pictures on the second or third largest social media platform in Russia, which I know everyone is on. That, like, it's this platform no one's heard of before, but this dude was on it. Apparently that's where they hang out, and he had pictures posted under his profile that are unconfirmed to even be from this guy's account, but some reporter found this shit, and he has like a swastika and an SS tattoo. So, one, like at this point, I feel like this feels like a plant. Like this feels like a false flag thing where like this, I'm not trying to be, any which way, but like Hispanics from Texas, just tend to be Democrat. So if this guy is a Democrat, leftist leaning type of person, and you tell him like, hey, you're going to do this thing, and we're going to finally save children's lives because we're going to, finally get gun restrictions down, but we need you to like get all this Nazi propaganda, printed on you, on your body, so that we can, put this on the right when you do it. We got to make something so horrible that the right finally have to answer for how horrible they are. So we need you to get these tattoos and then go do a thing. Like that to me sounds like a thing. And like, I know that sounds like weird.
I was going to say, that sounds very conspiracy.
Okay, but here's the thing. Like, nobody talks about the weird shit from the Las Vegas shooting.
Sure.
Where they shot because the whole idea is that most shooters are far left. Like, most of the people who are shooters are either young and confused, sounds like a leftist, or they're actually leftists and they have all of this crap. But they tend to fire into their own, like, because, you kill what you are envious of. Typically, like, most mass shooters kill their own. So they would go to leftist type of places, schools and things of that nature, and kill other leftists. So, like, the lefts are like well, we need to make the right feel the pain. We're going to shoot up a country music concert. So then you look into the thing. The dude was like in Antifa. He was in all of these far left shits that's found in his hotel. But here's the one that doesn't make any sense to me. So, you got to figure like how much security is in a hotel in Vegas.
Right.
He, by himself apparently, because they've looked at all the tapes and there's no help. There's no conspiracy here. So by himself, removes this window that weighs, I want to say 4.5 tons. By himself. Removes the window, doesn't trigger any of the alarms, because I'm sure if you go to Vegas and you remove one of the big plate windows, like that's a thing. Because not only is he Superman, but like he's also MacGyver with the
sure.
thing, overdoing the alarm system. And then, like and he's a far leftist, which is not reported at all. And then like as soon as this started coming out, what was the largest shooting in U.S. history? Nothing to see here. We're going to stop. Everyone stop talking about it. Immediately.
Well, that goes back to our, like, this idea that the internet was going to give us all of this information, right? And we were going to suddenly have immediate access to unbiased, unfiltered information because now we could all communicate, and because we could cross communicate, we could verify information so much faster. And really what it's turned into is the media doubling down, tripling down on the media circus of, we're going to suppress everything that we don't want people to hear. And we're going to elevate, everything that we want the narrative to read like. So it's just crazy.
I wanted to touch on that, but before I don't want to get past this one detail up in the mall shooting for Texas. So they said in his, like, he wrote a thing. He wrote a manifesto. And he accredits Tim Pool for being what drove him, a dark Mexican, to being a white supremacist. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Tim Pool, he's a news-ish type reporter, does citizen journalism, who is half black and half white from the southern side of Chicago. So, like, the idea that a half black guy turns a dark Mexican guy into a white supremacist, like, but here's the thing, the general consensus is that the picture of how dark this guy and what he actually looks like is not being shown on social media.
So here's my thing. So we hear all the time, like, we found a manifesto that they wrote, and like that's always a thing that happens. Like we found this long note of saying,
sure.
Who really, like, to me, that's one of those first things. Like, I never believe when somebody says, "Oh, the police found a manifesto that he wrote,
Right.
posted on some, Russian website, whatever." I'm like, "No, he didn't. Like, you lost me at manifesto." Do you know how many kids in freaking junior high and high
Right.
school even know what the word manifesto
Right.
means?
People are too stupid now, and like typically speaking, crimes are crimes of passion.
Right.
So like when you had Columbine, that made sense. Like they picked on me, so I got some guns. We're gonna fuck them up. Like that
Yeah.
as a sentiment. Yeah,
That makes sense to me.
that makes sense to me. Like it's fucked up and it shouldn't be. But
Right.
like no one's like that's not real.
Right. That very is a like systematic, not systematic, but that's like I knew this guy from kindergarten to whatever grade,
Right.
and he just continued to continue, and I finally got pissed off enough.
Yeah, it's like when somebody kills their spouse. Like somebody fucked with him long enough, and finally, like he was in bed, so she poisoned him. Like I buy it. Like no one, like anyone who's been in a relationship. Like I'm not saying you should kill your spouse, but I understand.
Well, it's the like, what is it? Chicago. He ran into my knife 7 times. Like, I don't know what to tell you. He continued to continue.
I mean, that's like the Clinton suicides where he shot himself in the head 3 times.
Yeah, he shot himself in the head 3 times. Imagine that. Like some kind of weird muscle memory.
Yeah. But no, talking about like the news and things, it always makes me think of my mother.
Sure.
Because my mother, I mean, my mother is crazy and very slow, but she's also a product of her time. So I feel like before I even get into like what I'm going to say about my mother, I have to give like the backstory, which is actually kind of interesting. So you've heard this story before. So my mother, she's a boomer, which most people like don't look. They look at me and they don't do the math right. Like they're like, what? So my mother was 40 when she had me in 1984. My mother was born in 1945, directly after the war. However, it was not from somebody returning. So what ended up happening is my mother and her brother have the same mother, but not the same father. So my grandmother got married out of high school. I think it's because she was already pregnant. I'm not entirely sure on details there. Just math, looking at things. So, she marries the guy, but World War II's happening. So he goes off to World War II. And for those of you who don't know, because they don't do this anymore, it used to be where you could have a town and they would enlist together and you would be shipped out as that town as a unit. And the reason they don't do that anymore is because certain towns got wiped the fuck out, and that's really bad for the town when after the war, no one comes home. Like that's like a generation that's just...
It's dead.
So they don't do that anymore. The same reason that they don't put more than one brother on a ship.
Right.
For the same reason. So if the ship goes down, you don't lose 2 brothers in the same thing. You can also, I don't think you can even have brothers in a unit anymore, either for that reason. Regardless, at the time they were doing this, so the entire town went together. So she had friends from her town that were in his unit. So apparently, this guy, as the story goes, messes with a French prostitute while he's stationed in France, and word gets sent back to my grandmother, who's pissed at home, taking care of his boy. So she decides to have an affair with her boss, and gets pregnant with my mother. He gets home, sees his wife pregnant, and kills himself. So my grandmother got fired from her new job. Like, she had been working as a dental assistant, Jewish grandfather there. So she gets fired from that because when she gets pregnant, his wife, because he was married, had wanted nothing to do with a pregnant girl.
Sure.
And the wife's like, oh, you can't keep hiring her. Like, I don't trust you anymore, so get rid of her. So my grandmother had to provide for 2 children. Husband was dead. She was looked at poorly by her community for, quote unquote, having an affair on him, even though, I think there's a humanity where you understand her. I'm not saying that I don't know. Anyway, my grandmother felt horrible for this her whole life.
Sure.
But the issue was that she couldn't pay for any sort of childcare while she's working all the time, because she actually ended up working at a department store. So her in-laws, her former in-laws, the parents of the guy who killed himself because of the affair, ended up looking after my mother and her brother. So the in-law parents that are doing the babysitting, they really wanted to see their grandson, and they would apparently lock her in a closet every day
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah. And, yell at her for killing their son. Yeah, like my mother had anything to do with that. So
Sure.
my mother is emotionally
Wrecked
as a human being. She hates men.
Sure.
She's Christian in the sense that she believes that what Christ was here to do was to tell men that they should submit to women. And he was the spokesperson for God. Yeah, I mean, all sorts of shit. So my mother is very much so looking for she's taken victimhood onto herself, and she is an advocate for all victims.
Sure.
So it kind of makes sense in the whatever, because she's born in 1945, she comes of maturity in the 1960s.
Right.
So she has all of the civil rights movements going on. She, is heavily involved in that. Though it's also funny because she says the most racist shit, like she saved black people, like her personally. Which, I mean, and she just says all of this really funky, weird shit. So, she's also not the brightest person. She just, there's some developmental things that she just lacks as a human being. So, I was raised fairly abused by her. She divorced my dad while she was pregnant with him because she just wanted a child. She wanted the child to be from wedlock because she married him, but she didn't actually want a male to have access to the child because his toxic masculinity would be transferred to the child. I mean, the mental loops that you have to go through to understand my mother is.
I'll commend her on the toxic masculinity. She was definitely ahead of her time on that one.
Well, I mean, I don't think she used those words, but
sentiment.
Yeah, the sentiment was there that men were the devil, patriarch, all the bullshit. Yeah. So, anywho, my mother, she worked really hard. I will actually commend my mother and how hard she worked as a female. Professionally, she was very good at what she did. She wasn't always the best at the business of it, but the work ethic and actually the product. Sure. I can get into details, but nobody's going to want to hear that. But my point is as a business owner and working for herself and working very hard and being very successful for herself, she was always fairly more conservative throughout her life. Her favorite president through her life was Reagan. Reaganism, small government, big on Jesus.
Right.
Because to her, again, Jesus is there for the women, to tell men and put the patriarchy in its place. A lot of mixed messaging going on here. So, anyhow, she hated Trump. And, I never really understood why, because, we would, ask, I would just be like, well, I thought you were conservative. And he's like, yeah, but he's so racist. I'm like, well, what did he do that was racist? And, what I started to gather from conversations with her is I haven't really watched television. Television, as it was going on.
Live, real live over the air, flipping the channels, television.
High school.
Sure.
For me, over 20 years, I have not been plugged in. When I was in the military, they would have Fox News on in the mess hall, but my last time I went to a mess hall was in Afghanistan in 2006.
Yeah.
So,
we don't have TV.
Yeah.
Well, because I'm very similar in the sense that, I want to say I paid for cable when I received 6 months of cable when I got my very first apartment at 18. And since that time, I've never had, after that first 6 months, I've never had cable or live television.
Sure.
So our daughter has never had
television.
Never had live flip through the channels television.
And there have been times, and as an adult, I've had streaming services. the cord cutting thing. But then you're not getting news. Like
it's a weird thing.
Right, like you're not getting things as people are watching it because you just kind of discover things as they are. And before Netflix kind of became prominent, I would wait until people would tell me that a show was good, and I just buy the DVD.
Sure.
Which, again, like you're talking about television, but like when television would ever try and do anything political about whatever was in the news then, it was years removed where I didn't really connect the dots.
The dots.
And yeah, like I just never got into the emotional messages of what they were doing and manipulating. And like me watching the regular news, almost never really.
Sure. Well, my grandmother used to get mad about that all the time because she moved in when our daughter was born. My grandmother moved in for about a year, and that was probably one of the most frustrating years of my whole life. Not because she wasn't wonderful at teaching me how to be a mom, but because almost daily she was like, I hate the fact that I can't watch TV, I can't see the news, this is really fucking with me, I need to have my daily, click through the channels.
Right, and be told what to think about what's going on. But like, I think for me, it's just an issue of, who was it, Mark Twain, that once said that if you don't read the news, you're uninformed, and if you do read the news,
you're misinformed. Yes.
Which is basically how I think of the news today. And I really, say what you want about, Alex Jones, but I got into him well after kind of his, initial whatever. It was before Trump. And I just remember that he would say things, and I thought, like if you're not familiar with Walking, I think of him as a walking meme. I think he's funny, and he says weird shit, and I just like, it's conspiracy theory stuff, and it's like when I first listened to him, it's like the way that you would read the National Enquirer for news. Like, you're not reading it to like inform yourself. You're reading it for its shock value and its entertainment value.
Sure.
And that's how I came to him. But then he started getting politically attacked. And there were things that, like, I'd watch the episode, and then I'd hear the episode recounted on, CNN or mainstream news. And I would have friends that would listen and be like, what do you think? Like, Jones said this. No, he didn't.
No, yeah.
Like, I watched the episode. Like, I remember there was the whole Pizzagate thing. I don't know if you remember this. This was a national news story. So there was the DNC leaks, which still no one has read. Like very few people have actually read them, and there's been so much misinformation and cover-up to, like, hide what was in it. But one of the things that was talked about in them was messages leaked from Obama and Hillary and all these people that were coded for child sex trafficking. Like, if you look at...
I vaguely remember this.
Right.
I don't remember what was going on in my life at the time, but I was like, I don't have time for this.
Right. So, like, the code was based upon, like, the FBI's, like, code for, like, what they teach people, like, in manuals. And it was all coded, and it was... Like, if you read the actual messages, you can't read them and not think of them sexually,
Right.
Like, like hot dogs are boys of under a certain age.
Sure.
And him saying, like, I need 10 hot dogs for this weekend. The younger, the better. And that's, like, his actual message. Oh, God. And you're like, it's disgusting stuff.
Right.
And so anyways, this is coming out. Like, there's all the stuff from the DNC leaks. And one of the things that they did to cover this up is there was a pizza parlor. And pizza was also one of the code words. But there was a pizza parlor that was owned by a DNC donor in the DC area. And there was a lot of stuff going around on 4chan and the darker parts of the internet about this pizza parlor being used as a child sex trafficking thing. And, like, it's a creepy place. There's, like, weird gay sex stuff on the walls in the bathroom. They would have, like, tranny music hours that they bring kids to, and, like, put, videos of, like, 4-year-olds going to tranny music hour at the pizza parlor. So, this story broke on 4chan, and the thing is, anytime something like that breaks down, people will message and be like, what do you have to say about this, Alex? Whatever. And, like people were building this case. So Alex, when this story broke, was not there. I think he was on like a long weekend. So like I'm watching this story come out on like a Thursday and he's not there. So they have like the assistant host in. And the assistant host reads it. Just what I told you. Like, this is what is being said. Here's some of the pictures of the building. Could this be connected to what's going on? As soon as that person said it, Alex came back on like a Monday or something and said, look, I'm not here to accuse anybody. It's fucking weird, the artwork that they have, but there's really nothing connecting these two things.
Sure.
On, I want to say Tuesday or Wednesday, a shooter shot the pizza parlor up and blamed Jones. So then the story became Jones said all of these things, and it was directly linked to Jones. The person who covered it was his guest reporter. Jones never said it, and the first day he got back, he was like, look, this is weird, they're probably into some weird shit to have these artworks, but like, you really shouldn't look here. This seems like a setup that they're trying to draw your attention here when...
Yeah, it's the razzle dazzle. It's the like, look over here while I'm, and the media is so great at it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they're brilliant.
Right.
They're absolutely brilliant at this tactic of, look at this shooting, look at this political thing, look at this whatever, and they're constantly signaling in one direction while doing things where no one is watching because they're razzle dazzling us.
Sure.
It happens constantly.
Constantly. I mean, I always, like I've said this before, my biggest political thing is like, when Trump was in office, the two biggest things were the two spending bills that got pushed through, and it happened to be on the same days as his first impeachment and the Kavanaugh hearings.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand that was the important thing that happened on either day, like the whatever, then you don't understand politics, and we're not the same political breed.
Yeah, they do it all the time.
Right.
It's the filibustering of the media world. I'm just going to fill your ear with so much bullshit that you don't have the time, energy, or mental capacity to process that I'm doing something else over here.
Right. And like the thing about Tim Pool is I respect him greatly. He's one of the most neutral person because he says I'm a classical liberal. I just can't go on with this far left socialist extremism. Half black guy, actually lives fairly close to us. And the issue is like by saying that he turned someone who we're not showing the color of into a white supremacist, they're trying to motivate people to look at Tim Pool and just be like, white supremacist, whatever. Because that's the problem that my mother had, is like she would look at CNN, be told that Trump is a racist. It didn't matter what I said or whatever, because why would the media lie?
Yeah, I mean, this idea that the media is infallible.
Right.
They said it, so it must be true.
And why, and like, are you a racist? Like, she would ask me stuff like that. I'm like, you must really, really hate brown people. You must really hate Mexicans. And I just remember, like, at the time being like, what the fuck are you, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
I don't understand that. I don't understand where you think that from. And like, you get her to like watch undoctored clips on the internet. She said, well, that's the internet. That's where the lies are.
Oh gosh.
And it's like because my mother doesn't understand the internet. So like, or like you would like, do sources. And here's the thing is it's like, if you have Tim Pool, who again is very, valid, very fair, very down the line. Yeah,
very middle of the road in the sense that he's not voting for one or over the other.
Right.
Yeah.
That now you can't use him because they're extremizing him to the point where if I were to go to someone like my mother and be like, Tim Pool said this, he's a middle road, you should listen to him. That's what that shooter, the white supremacist
It's what they want you to think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She would tell me, like, you're being indoctrinated by the right. And I'm like, Mom, I'm a libertarian. Like, I don't think that you understand any of this.
Yeah.
But there is a special level of person who I don't think my mother buys into the liberalism or the far leftism. It's just that she doesn't see it and she doesn't know it because, again, all she does every day is watch CNN. And I think that there's also a certain type of person that, there is a large group of people who only watch Fox News.
Yeah, I mean,
And I don't think one's better than the other.
I was going to say, let's be honest. There are very few, if any, that watch both.
Right.
You are either a CNN guy
or MSNBC or
you're a Fox guy. And there are very few, if any at all, who will tell you, "Oh yeah, I watch both interchangeably."
Right.
Like that's not a thing. What's interesting to me also though is this idea that if someone else is being indoctrinated, then you cannot be. So in the sense that, well, Fox is indoctrinating you.
Right.
Right? But that inherently means that CNN
is not indoctrinating
me because indoctrinating is bad.
Right.
So if if indoctrinating is bad and Fox is indoctrinating you,
right,
then there's no way that I'm being indoctrinated by watching.
Because how else would I know that you're being indoctrinated?
Right. And it's this idea that like, they've because that's what I've seen in this like liberal movement is like, well, if you're a staunch right conservative, you're being indoctrinated, but the left is elevated. They're evolved. And they use different words.
Right. And they're allowed to do all the racist stuff because they fuck black guys.
Right. Yeah. But it's that idea of like, it couldn't be me.
Right.
That's, whatever. It's you.
Right. Well, I mean, I think when you talk about like the media and things of that nature is there's so many cultural shifts when it comes to ageism in media. And I was thinking about this the other day, and we've talked about this, that at every age, and it's different for generations, I think it's even different per person, but there is a time, if you are old enough, and I think I think we're both kind of past it for us, maybe me more than you. But there is a time where you no longer associate yourself with current media. And one of the things that happens with this is music. It's the first to happen. So everybody is nostalgic for the music that was commonplace when they were in their youth, when they were coming of age. So like if you think about like the music you went to high school with, here's the thing. When I was in high school, I hated that music. I hated all of it. I was like an 80s metal guy in the 90s and early 2000s.
And that's kind of weird because I found that most of our generation love the 80s.
Yes.
We love the 80s, and I think maybe because our parents...
I don't know, I grew up in the 80s.
I don't know what it is. I mean, I grew up in the 80s too, but like, let's be honest, just because we were born in the 80s...
I know.
You didn't start listening to music until the 90s. Like, you just can't, because if you were... You had to be like maybe 10 before
I would say I really developed my musical taste in like 90 and 91. Which I know isn't quite the 80s, but like...
It's 80s adjacent.
It's 80s adjacent, and like, let's be honest, when you think of 90s music, most of the 90s bands that we think of came out in 92, 91, 92, when grunge came out, like the alt movement. So before that, when you're talking about 90 and 91, especially in the rock field, which was the biggest, genre at the time, because you're just coming off of hair metal. So all the hair metal bands and the thrash bands from the 80s are still big in 90 and 91, like Warrant, and there's a lot of quote-unquote great 80s music that came out in 90 and 91.
Sure.
So to me, like the thrash metal movement was what I, came into, and if you think about, like, I remember when the Black Album from Metallica first came out, like I remember that as a moment the first time I saw Enter Sandman, and like I remember when that was like a new video, I do have those memories, and I even have like memories from the 80s in like because like so like in 90 I would have been 6, and I want to say when I was 4 or 5 the first album that I would ever say was mine was Kiss Destroyer.
Sure.
So like anyways, my point being is that like I like classic metal and rock into my graduation year in 03, but like the songs that I hated listening to in 03, I now like look back fondly on because they remind me
of your high school
of my high school days. But like I listen to modern pop music and really pop music since like 2005 or 6, and I just I don't associate with any of it. Like, I'm just like, what the fuck is... And even rock and metal, like, new shit, like, I'm just like, there hasn't been good music that's come out in the rock scene since 2006, 2007, 2008, maybe.
Yeah, music is one of those things where I think gets... It gets, like, in your bones...
Right.
Very quickly, like early in life.
Right. Like, there's been good albums from older artists that have come out since then. Like, Danzig had a good run in the teens.
Sure.
And, you know, even Metallica came out with a couple good albums. And, you know, but, like, the problem when you like music that's very technical is that the older the artist gets, that they're more and more incapable of producing it.
Right.
So, like, you know, like, Meshuggah came out with some good stuff in the teens. That's about it. Like, I mean, like there's a couple things here and there that I'm probably forgetting. I'm not trying to be inclusionary here. But, like, by and large, there's not a band from 2000 that formed and came out with their first album in 2005 after where I'm like, you and me, we'll get along. Nothing. Like, there's none.
Yeah, no, there's really nothing. Like, I don't even really... I hate listening to the radio now. Mm-hmm. Like, I just won't. Right. I won't listen to the radio. I'll listen to songs that I've curated on, let's say, like, Pandora or Spotify.
Sure, like older songs.
But, like, listening to the radio... Uh-huh. And then it just hurts my heart when I'm, like, find an oldie station and they're like, we're listening to the oldies. And it's all my favorite songs, and that just breaks my heart. I'm like, forget it. I'll go back to Pandora where I don't have to feel your ageism through the freaking radio.
Right. The golden oldies of Nirvana.
Just,
fuck me.
Just go away.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear
Nobody wants to hear it. Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, but no, like Nirvana is classic. I'm like, no, this is cutting edge. This is cutting edge.
It's not classic. Just go away.
And it's like I saw an interview of Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins the other day, and he's like old with gray hair, and it's like, oh, motherfucker.
It's heartbreaking.
Like, yeah. Like, you look like the Rolling Stones did in my youth.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you look like right now, Billy Corgan. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to shit on...
love you.
What the fuck?
Well, like, I remember, like, when my oldest cousin, who is close to my age, turned, I want to say 30.
Right.
I sent them a, like, happy birthday text, and I was like, okay, now that you're 30, like, you need to stop, because... If you're 30, that means that I'm going to be 30 soon, and I'm not okay with this. Like, when you were 25, that was cool. 27, you know, not a big deal. But now you're like...
Well, I'm turning 40 soon.
Well, that's my point. Like, this is this was years and years ago. But I was like, holy shit. Like, thinking that my older cousins were, you know... Oh, like, now they'd be turning, like, 38, 39. Like, I don't... In my brain, I'm like, no, they're like... 28.
Right.
Which...
Well, I mean, so, like, you know, we're talking about music now, but then I think about movies, right? And I think about, like, I was a film studies person.
Right.
I know way more about movies, talking about from, like, pre-1900 silent era all the way through...
Well, I mean, you legitimately went to school for this, so...
Right, but, like, I mean, like, even for going to school for it, I knew more than everyone else. I knew more than a lot of the professors. The professor would be like, how the fuck do you know all this? And I'm like, I'm autistic. I don't know what the fuck to tell you. Like, I'm autistic with a lot of time on my hands. I mean, this is what I dedicated my life to, and I hate new movies. Like the entire thing that I love the most in the world, I can't watch. Like, Marvel, by and large, is shite.
Yeah.
I don't respect it on any level. I mean, we just saw, like, there's, like, still stuff on the indie circuit that comes out that I like. And we just saw
X, and we still haven't seen it.
We still haven't seen X. We just saw Pearl.
But we saw Pearl.
We can't find X locally. We live in the middle of nowhere, so, you know, no spoilers. Yeah. But no, like there's a lot of the indie stuff, indie horror, I'm really into. And I loved, we just saw, you know, a lot of Ari Aster stuff, and, like, we just saw Barbarian, which I thought was astounding. Like, there's movies like that where I see something, I'm like, wow, I feel motivated. And I haven't felt motivated. Like, because here's the thing, like it used to be, I could go out and watch a ton of movies and feel just excited for film and to write and to be creative. And now it's like maybe once a year.
It's depressing.
It's depressing because
I feel the same way that you feel about movies, but about art. Because I'm more the textile art.
Sure.
And like I'm watching all these stupid TikTok and Instagram reels, whatever, about art. And to me, it's just very like, we're just gonna like dump paint on a thing and like spin it.
Right.
And I'm like, so you're talking about like technicality in music. I mean, when you're literally dumping paint on a canvas and spinning it, there is no technicality. Like,
right.
I'm not trying to like shit on new age artists, but like
they have nothing to say. It's all. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, I remember growing up in the 90s, and sure everybody knows Nirvana, but there were so many other bands and so many other things that were going on, and like there were so many different genres, and like the whole joke of teen movies when we were growing up is you had the jocks, you had the losers, and you had the whatever, and now everyone's the same because everyone listens to the same. So like because everyone listens to the same 5 artists, because there only are 5 artists now. Who in school like doesn't like that 5 artists? You get what I'm saying? Like, who is the person who's the outcast who listens to goth? Like, the goth kids don't exist because goth doesn't fucking exist anymore. Or it kind of does, but everybody's goth because everybody points blue hair dye in their hair and is transgender and kind of weird, but that's the acceptable thing. And like they've just conglobed every like group.
Well, it's the outskirts, but you're still in the middle ground.
Right.
Like that to me is bizarre.
You forced everyone to the middle, and it's awful.
Yeah, so like, I mean, I've said before on the podcast, like I did substitute teaching for a while, and what just blew my mind is that I would go to the school, and I many schools, not just one, but like many schools, high school and middle school, and all the kids acted the same. They were all entitled pieces of crap.
Yes,
like,
that is the common part of
yeah. But like the other thing is, no matter how alternatively a student would dress, by and large the attitude was exactly the same.
Right.
And it didn't matter that one of them was a jock, let's say, or one of them was artsy, or one of them like they were all
regressed to the middle.
Yeah, they all had regressed to the middle. Like, where I remember when I went to school, it was a very, like, if I am in this group, I have my own set of idols, I have my own set of music, I have my own aesthetic, I have my own... Whereas now, everybody wants to have that same feeling, but because everybody also wants to get along and be like everybody else, it's very watered down.
Right, and I feel like here's the thing, right? Like, nobody has those personal experiences because it's now like a collective experience. So it's like, when you look at what's popular now, you have the same 4 or 5 bands that are all horrible. And when I say bands, I'm including musicians and pop artists and all the bullshit. And then on top of that, you have Marvel movies, which everyone watches because everyone's a superhero now and everyone's super special, but also in their super specialty, they can treat everyone like they're not super special, so everyone is their own diva in a fucking fucked up whatever.
Yes.
There's the Harry Potter bullshit, which everyone... Like the thing of it is like, I can't tell you how many dates I have been on with girls who have tried to explain to me how deep and personal Harry Potter was to them and how only they get it. And it's like, you're one of a billion. Like there are a billion people, like there's nothing... like, that is... Like, if that's your personality, you are just a cog. Like you are not a person, you are a cog. And I'm not saying that to shit on Harry Potter specifically, but it's like Marvel, Harry Potter... Billie Eilish, whatever the fuck.
Eilish.
I don't give a shit. You're not important. Your music sucks. All right. You're like the skinny fat. Who like.
I like her.
Oh, whatever. Anywho, but no, like it's the same bullshit, and everybody likes the same music. Everybody watches the same movies, the same TV shows, and it's just. Everything's the same now.
It's all amalgamated.
Yes.
That's really what it is. Is that it's all amalgamated in the sense that the big corps, right? Like the big guys who make movies have done what we talked about earlier. It's the same 4 chords, right?
Right.
Making a movie, I'm not trying to be diminutive here, but like making a movie is not hard. Like you can go online.
From a technical standpoint, it can be, but
no, what I mean is it's not hard in the sense that it's a 3-part story, right? And if you look at Marvel movies, it is very regimented.
Yes.
It is very like, this is what you do in the first act, this is what you do in the second act, and this is what you do in the third act.
Right.
And if you follow this pattern, same analogy with the music, if you use these 4 chords
it's
and
this length, and this is where you can get people's attention.
Right,
this
and you use this beat, and you do
this tempo,
the chorus, the refrain, the chorus, and and you throw a hook in, at whatever the thing is. It's not hard. Like the roadmap is there. And what they've done, what capitalism has done, unfortunately in this sense, is they've put together a roadmap that they know will sell. And now they've just blasted all media with this roadmap for music, for movies, for pictures, for whatever, and it works.
Right, and it hooks people's attention so that you can push bullshit stories. I also think it's an issue of, like, with movies, like, Waterworld started bad movies. And I'm not saying that Waterworld was a bad movie, because, like, we both actually like Waterworld.
I love Waterworld.
But, like, it bombed in the U.S. Like just objectively, it did not make its money, and it used to be that you had to make most of your money in the U.S. And they just kind of on a whim, because they were going to lose their shirts, decided to try every foreign box office to make their money back. And it made a ton of money in China. And one of the reasons why they were able to do it so much is there's very little dialogue. So there's, like, it tended to be that, like, the more translation you had to do, the more problem, like, the more expensive it would be. Like, bring it to a new market, you had to pay for, commercials, and you had to pay for whatever. But if you can make a commercial that's just explosions, and you can use that same commercial anywhere, like music, explosions, action. There's no translation needed for that. And you, like, here's the thing: is it's like, if you were to do a movie that was about the subtle, culture in Appalachia, you're not going to get a huge audience for that. Like, I'm not saying it's not important,
or that it wouldn't be good,
but I'm saying like it's hard to teach people about a culture that's not their own. So, like, typically when they talk about stories, what they want is these bigger stories that everyone can kind of relate to, that aren't too personal.
Or that are in a place that is so regionally known, like New York.
Right.
That it doesn't matter that you're not from New York, everybody knows the Big Apple, or everybody knows Los Angeles.
Right. Like, or whatever. Or, Texas is kind of its own, like, idea of Texas, even though they always get it totally wrong.
Yes.
But the point is you don't get movies about the small guy or people who aren't from those big areas. So it's the FOMO of, like, if you're not in New York, LA, Miami, or, Texas, then you're just missing out on life, because if you're in Iowa, you suck. Yeah. That's really, like, the thought process here. And the $5-10 million indie film about, the struggles of a farming community in Iowa, those movies don't exist anymore.
Sure.
The movies about Appalachia don't exist anymore. But here's what does exist is, like, they don't even like making movies about places anymore, because it's easier if you make up a bullshit place that doesn't exist. Fairy tale land, where there's a lot of explosions that you don't have to explain context, is because an explosion is an explosion everywhere. A gunshot and like an action sequence is an action sequence everywhere. So the reason why everything is now an action movie is because it's the only way that you can sell to all markets in the world. And then what they've also is you need to dumb it down and not have any real thought into it, because most people are stupid, and you have to get the absolute most people to go see the thing.
Right, it's the least common denominator.
Right, and then on top of that, you have to, like, have nothing a political or a statement. Like, action movies actually used to try and say something in the 70s and 80s about whatever. They can't anymore. And then on top of that, I thought there was one other, like, common thing here. You need an IP that everyone... So to, like, bring people to your explosion chase movie. Right.
Well, it's the Fast and the Furious. Mm-hmm. So that, I mean... that IP is that they are literally on 10. That
Yeah.
it is X. That's what it's called, like Fast X,
Right.
or something to that effect. Furious X.
Yeah, I don't know. Like Fate of the Furious was F8, so it was F8. Remember that? Did you remember that? That was so dumb.
But like, yeah, I mean,
I've never seen. I saw the first one in theaters. I saw the second one on Netflix because it was at one point where I'm like, everyone's raving about these. I'll start watching them. I watched 2 and I'm like, nope. Done. I'm out. I can't go any further. Like,
I want to say I got one more further than you. I did watch 3.
Yeah, but the funny thing about that is like, and I was almost thinking like maybe I should watch one of the new ones, and then I saw an article come out that was listing them in order of goodness, and 2 was high up on the list. And I'm like, 2 was one of the best. Really? I didn't miss a fucking thing. Perfect. They only get worse from there. Fucking A. You know.
Yeah, well, so, but it just goes to prove your point. Like, you have to fit the IP that's already a proven thing.
Right.
Like, we already know that people have grown up, really, with Fast and the Furious. So no matter how bad it is,
they might go see it.
They're going to go see it because they're like, well, I grew up with it. You know, I can't not... Or they identify with the characters to such a degree that it's the Harry Potter syndrome.
Right.
Of, I'm going to go see every Harry Potter movie. I'm going to go see every Dumbledore, what is it? Fantastic
You've already
Beasts.
invested so much. So it's like, you know, like with the Harry Potter thing, again, like I don't really like Harry Potter personally. I know we disagree, and that's not the point of what I'm going to say. But like, you have the original 7 novels and the movies that came from them, which... You know, I hear from fans about how good or bad they are. I'm not going to comment too much on that. But I think we can all agree that the prequels and all the bullcrap that's coming out now is...
It hurts my heart.
It hurts her heart and she likes it. To me, like I even hear about it, I'm like, that's dumb. But people still go see it because it's like a fear of missing out in terms of like, I've already invested 7 books in the first 8 like actual Harry Potter movies. So therefore... Like
I want to see
where it goes or what it goes. Like even if people know it's a dumpster fire, there's like this idea that like they'll be incomplete if they don't finish whatever that storyline is. And it's like I'm just thinking like we are having this argument now because one of my favorite, most inspiring novels to me growing up in my adolescence was Dune.
Yeah.
And I actually came across the Lynch film before I read the book. So I watched the Lynch film. Fell in love with it.
Yeah.
Then read the book, read the whole series, fell in love with it. And they were going to come out with the new Dune film. And like, there's no way I'm not going to see a new Dune interpretation.
Right. Like, I was so excited. Because very similar to you, I watched the movie first.
Right.
I then read the books.
Right.
And then I remember, though... Before I even saw the movie or the books, I played the video game.
Oh, I love the video game. I was actually just about to say that.
It was the old PC game.
Yeah, there was Dune 2000, and then there was Emperor Struggle for Dune or something like that.
Yeah, so I remember the old PC game where I'd have to put in the CD-ROM and like... I mean, so that's actually where mine started because I loved the video game, and I was like...
It's like Command and Conquer-ish, but yeah.
I mean, it's to die for. And then I watched, that's where I then was like, where did this come from? And I think it was my dad who was like, oh, it's a movie.
Right.
And so like that started my whole love affair with Dune. And then they're like, oh, we're going to do a new Dune. And I'm like, okay, like you've got my attention.
Right.
I hated it.
It was one of the dumbest, slowest, inaccurate... Like, they took all the cerebral aspects of it out.
Yeah, like, and we've talked about this in the sense that, like, the good movies, they really have politics in the background. Like, Star Trek is nothing but politics.
Space commies. Yes.
And then Star Wars, nothing but politics.
Right.
Dune, nothing but politics.
Right.
Like, it's politics in a sci-fi world, which to me is like... I mean, you could not make me...
I'm still waiting for Strangers in a Strange Land to come out. They'll fuck it up. They will fuck
really
the shit out of that up. There's no way that's coming out.
Yeah, but like to me, there's nothing better than watching like a sci-fi film that it's all wrapped up in politics. Sure. And
Demolition Man.
Yeah, Demolition Man. Yeah. This is great. But then I watched the new Dune and I'm like, what did you do? Like what I really wanted to scream at the screen was, what did you do to my childhood?
Right,
It's
that's exactly
like-
how I felt. And like, I know that not everybody feels that for Dune, but I feel like everybody's childhood has been molested at least slightly by the new Hollywood.
Yeah, pick an IP, whether it's Star Wars or Harry Potter now.
Right, the new Harry Potter. Yeah.
The new Harry Potter, and now they're going to do the reboot, which...
But then here's the thing, is like we both, like I am on the, like I saw the new Dune Part 1, and it sucked. I hated it. And I'm like, I'm done. And she's like, well, don't you want to see part 2 and see what happens? I'm like, no, they're going to fuck it up. It's the same people who did the first one. It won't be good. And she's like, but I'm already invested. I saw the first half. And I'm like they're just taking your money at this point. She's like, I know.
I'm aware. I'm fully aware of the fact that I'm being taken advantage of.
And do you actually think it's going to be good?
No. But can I sleep at night knowing that I haven't watched it? Not really.
And I'm like, I'm not trying to make fun of you, but like, this is the problem.
I'm aware. I agree vehemently.
This is how we're getting Tranny April in the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, is because like people will show up for completionists, and it's like, I grew up with Indiana Jones. I don't have the love affair that I know a lot of people do with it.
Sure, I like it a lot. But
I like it a lot. I like the first 2 films. I saw the third one in theaters in '89. Like, I remember my grandfather, like it was really expensive to buy VHS when they first came out.
Yes.
It was like $80-$90 in like $89, like in $1989, which would probably be like $500 today or some bullshit.
Yeah.
And like, I remember he liked it so much in theaters and had such a like bonding moment with me in theaters watching it, that he sent away so that when it first got released on VHS, that they would directly send it to us. And I remember that coming in the mail and watching Indiana Jones. And it's like, now you're doing female bullshit, whatever. And I'm just like,
this is not the movie I watched with my grandfather.
This is not the movie I watched with my grandfather. And it's like, I felt that way with Star Wars. Like, the original trilogy was great. And
it was great.
The prequels I didn't love, but like, there wasn't the bullshit in them. Like, they were just kind of ill-conceived. Like, you got the idea that, you know, George Lucas dropped out of filmmaking to be with his kids. And it's like, you get out of a profession for 20 years and you pick it back up. Like, he wasn't...
You're never as good as you were, but you're better than most. And that's a weird place to be in.
Right.
Because, like, we've both been in career fields where you were in a career field for an extended period of time. So, in your case, I'm using the military as an example.
Right, sure.
But you can't go to the military now and be as proficient as you were.
Maybe not,
then.
but like, I still did that one job and did a good job.
You did.
I'm not going to get into that. But
like, I'm not shitting on your ability, but what I'm saying is like...
No,
like,
I'm not as sharp as good as I am. I'm not as good as I was. I'll give you that.
So, like, I was in the insurance industry for over 12 years, but I've been out of it. So, for me to go back in, I'm much better than most.
Right.
But I would never, especially right out the gate, would never be as good as I was.
Sure. So, I feel like that's where the prequels are for me, personally.
Right.
I know a lot of people love them. I'm not trying to, like, get on them. But the Disney... movie or dog shit.
Well, that's the another trailer we saw was the Haunted Mansion, which I mean we've also talked about on the podcast. I hate horror, and I kind of jokingly looked at you and was like, you know, that's a horror movie I'd go see, and you're like, that's a shot in the face. If you were endorsing it, I'm never gonna go see it.
Yeah, but I mean, like I don't have any fond memories for the Eddie. I never even saw the Eddie Murphy one. So.
I can't. Eddie Murphy is a very one-sided character for me, and I just can't do.
Why?
Eddie Murphy. He is Eddie Murphy no matter where he is, and I just.
Okay, I mean, like, I didn't know why you don't like him. I think it's because you didn't like his stand-ups back in the day.
No. I just mean like Eddie Murphy is very just Eddie Murphy.
Well,
and
most
like,
stars are. Most actors are just just
whoever they are.
Right.
Sure, but like for me, it's just very like, you know what, I can tolerate you in Shrek. Like. I'm good with that. Well, but like other movies, like, because then we get into like Dr. Dolittle, and I'm like, I don't need to see Eddie Murphy as Dr. Dolittle. And then there's like a couple others that he did.
And here's the Mulan, played basically Donkey.
Yeah, he played
Donkey the Dragon.
Yeah, he was Donkey the Dragon, or he was the Dragon the Donkey, because Mulan I think came out first. Whatever. But like that's my point. It's like I've seen, you know what, Eddie Murphy, you're a good Eddie Murphy. You are a fantastic Eddie Murphy.
Here's the thing about Eddie Murphy. In the 80s, Eddie Murphy was Eddie Murphy. And then there was 90s Eddie Murphy. Like, I think it started with, like, The Nutty Professor made a shit ton of money. And then he became 90s Eddie Murphy, and he's still there.
Yes. You know what? You're right. Because I had forgotten that that's really where I saw him the first time. where I never saw him move past that. I was
Right.
like,
Because
so
80s Eddie Murphy was like Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2,
Right.
48 Hours. There was a couple of other, like, Trading Places.
Right.
And that's hysterical. Like, I can still go back and watch the
you're
shit
right.
out of that.
I will absolutely
There was his
agree.
2 stand-up specials, which are also hysterical, even if they're slightly misogynistic. They're still funny.
Sure.
Whatever. I mean, I'm not going to, like, argue two-part because, like, I know it's rough.
It is very
Rough around the edges.
It
but
is very rough.
But I feel like it's also, there's an honesty to it that I appreciate.
Sure.
And you're like, that's mean, and I'm like, but it's honest. Like, let's.
But I also feel that way, like, about, like, Bill Cosby. Like, Bill Cosby has some really great stand-ups, and I really hate that it's almost, like, illegal now to say that you like
I still think he's innocent.
Bill Cosby.
I think he's innocent.
I think he's innocent, which, again, like, we're gonna get a crash wave of, like, I can't believe you, but, like, some of his, I have never laughed so hard in my whole life than watching his old stand-ups. They're freaking hilarious.
So the one thing I will say about negative of Bill Cosby, and the only thing that's kind of, like, there's a lot of details in the cases and how they were handled where I'm like, that just doesn't add up. That's some, it's like the Hispanic white supremacist who got converted by the like, there's some of that shit with Bill Cosby. There's one episode of The Cosby Show where he talks about drugging women.
Yes.
And, like,
that came up a little bit, and people were like, no.
And that became, like, a meme for a bit. And, like, I just remember, like, I watched the whole episode, and it's like, holy shit, that dude raped some bitches. Like,
yeah, like, that was a very, like,
we're all uncomfortable together.
Yes, we're all uncomfortable together, and we're all just gonna, make side eyes at each other.
But it's also, like, a weird thing where, like, in the episode, it's more about you have hysterical women, and he drugs them to, like, get them to calm down. Like she's on her period, better give her some of that sleepy medicine so, we can calm her down. And, like, I mean, it's kind of innocent. Like, it's obviously taking her will away, but there was definitely, like, an 80s-ism of that, which
the 80s was so great at that, though.
Right.
Like, let's be honest. Like, 80s television was really good at just being funny and honest at the same time. And
right, like, there was the 16 Candles where, like, you had the uppity bitch.
Right.
So, like, you had her pass out, and she got, like, taken advantage of by the nerdy kid, and she woke up next to him, and she's like, well, I guess I love you now, and it's like, we're all together, and like,
yeah.
Or, like Revenge of the Nerds, where, like, he, like, wears the jock's helmet, and, like she thinks it's the jock boyfriend.
Yeah. Well, even the Goonies does it. The Goonies does it also in a very subdued way. Like, the girl can't find her glasses, or she's got her eyes closed, and she ends up kissing the little brother. And she's like, and then she tells the older brother, I didn't know you wore braces. And he's like, huh? Because he doesn't know that she's referring to her kissing him. So even, like, in the Goonies, they did it where it's a very, like...
Well, here's the thing. Like, the idea wasn't to misidentify yourself with a woman, like, to go and be like, hey, I'm pretending to be your husband and I'm just going to take you. The idea in the 80s was that if you were in the place of the person being tricked, you should be open to ideas that if you didn't know that it, let's take this as a racial way, right? Like, if you didn't know it was a black person and you did something and you're like, oh, you actually have worth that I would have judged you prematurely and had prejudice. Right. So, like, you're the nerdy kid. So I would normally have prejudice, but because I didn't know, now that I have to deal with you as a person, you're not so bad. And that was really the point of those movies. It wasn't that you were going to enforce that from the male perspective as much as, like, we should really give other people a chance and not judge people. And, like, I'm not saying that it's the trope should continue, but I think that that's the intent and how it should be based, rather than, like, we're going to cancel every comedy that used that trope.
Which is what I was going to say, like, where conversely you now have, we all just need to be homogenous.
Right.
Like, where the message in the 80s was very like everybody deserves a chance. And you might give them the chance and they might be a total shit person.
Right.
And if they're a shit person, give them their comeuppance
Right.
and, destroy them or whatever. But if they're a good person, then you were right to give them the chance. Whereas now in the movies, everybody is so homogenous that you are either required to give everybody a chance and they are always good. It's like the girl in the birthday horror movie where she tries to be good and then is good in the most horrible way.
I mean, it's. I think it's more that like if you're an ethnic person, you are inherently good, and if you're a white male, you're inherently incompetent and got that way because of the patriarchy, and that's really...
Yeah. And I remember doing a study on this in college, actually, of like how annoyed I was that I could no longer watch TV. I came to a point in college where I actually wrote a whole paper. I was so mad about this that I wrote a whole paper on why I couldn't watch TV, because the tropes were always that the woman was smarter than the man and the man was incompetent. And my issue with this was that it forced women to believe that that was the only option. The only option for you
is to outsmart the man.
Not to outsmart him on purpose. It was not that you're supposed to outsmart the man. It was that you are inherently smarter than them. So you have to just deal with it. In the sense that, like, you have no better option. So marrying the doofus is the best you're ever going to get. So you need to just be happy with marrying the doofus. And I remember citing all of these examples, like Everyone Loves Raymond and King of Queens and The Simpsons. And there was a whole bunch of things that I had written. And I was like, look, why is this idea being perpetuated that I'm never going to do better than the doofus? I'm never going to find a smart man anywhere.
Well, I remember reading a thing a long time ago, because I feel like the prototype of that is Homer Simpson. Like, I'm just I feel like he was the first one.
He was the first one. I will give him that Marge is not portrayed as the, like, super smart.
Out of his league. I think she is on the show because he's so negative.
Because he's so much of a doofus.
Right.
She can't get more doofusy.
Right.
But it definitely started there, and then they raised the female intelligence while leaving the doofus.
But the issue is in the first couple of seasons of The Simpsons, he's not super dumb. He's not super smart. He's definitely someone who struggles with intelligence, but he tries really hard, and there's a sincerity of him trying to provide for his family and take care of his family. And, like the fact that he's struggling a little bit makes for some hijinks, but it's not that he's a retard. Like, I'm not trying to be any which way, but he's a retard. Like, this person is handicapped.
Yeah, I mean, in later seasons, and especially now, it's a widely known fact. Like, he's an idiot, he's retarded.
Right, so, like, this idea that men are so incompetent, the idea that, like, a woman... Because here's the thing, I think that, like, when you look at King of Queens, and you look at dad bods, and, like, obviously Leah Remini, the girl who plays King of Queens, versus Kevin... something.
I can't remember.
I want to say Kevin Holland, but that's just because I've got MMA on the brain right now. Well, shout out to Kevin Holland. But anywho,
I like that MMA is just living.
Kevin James was the dude on there. And here's the thing: is I think a guy who provides for his family is a good dad, good to his kids. They can get out of their league a little bit.
Sure. Like, I'm not saying you need to be the smartest, most capable, like, score a 10 in every category. But this idea that the base level is always doofus. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the base level. And you might be able to, because he provides for his family and he provides for his wife, but it's this idea that you just have to deal with it. That this idea that buffoonery. That's what, exactly. It's you can never expect for them to be smart enough to figure it out, because they're just a buffoon.
When I think of all of this, is I think about, they did a thing, I believe it was the Museum of African Culture or whatever, where they were listing things that are racist. And one of the things they said was time. The idea of time, the idea of showing up on time, the idea that you will... Because here's the thing, because they said that it's a form of chauvinism of Europeans to keep a schedule or to keep whatever, and that it's a way to keep people of color down since they're incapable of showing up on time or whatever. And it's
That's so insulting.
It's the most insulting thing I've ever heard in my entire life. But it's this notion of like inherent value versus uninherent value, that the only reason why white people can succeed is because of the game is stacked, because we've created these things and you are not held accountable as a minority to basic working conditions.
Sure. Well, it's this idea that, that is, I mean, just on a base level, that idea doesn't even make sense.
Right.
Because it's insulting in the sense that you're implying much more than what you're saying. Because what
Right.
you're implying is that minorities can't tell time.
Right.
That minorities can't afford a watch.
That they can't keep. Like, I just remember,
or even like you could just like again the implications just keep getting deeper and deeper, because then you get into like, well, minorities can't afford transportation.
Right.
Like what are you?
Well, I remember they did a really great skit, or like a in-depth thing about talking about like the IDs are racist when talking about voter ID.
Like an identification.
Right. So like they went to New York and they went to a liberal university. I don't know what university they went to, but one of the New York universities. They talked to all these white people. They're like, is voter ID racist? They're like, yes. Black people can't get IDs. Black people
again,
like whatever.
You're implying so much more than what you're saying.
Right. And then they went to like a black neighborhood. Like they went to Queens and they talked to black people and they're like, what is voter ID racist? And they're like, yeah, do you know how to get an ID? And they're like, yeah, at the ID store. Can you get there? They're like, yeah, it's 2 blocks from here. Like, what would you feel if a white person told you you were incapable of getting an ID? And they'd be like, that's racist. And I'm like,
yeah, it's ridiculous. And that's kind of my whole point with this idea of this male doofus character. Because it, like you said, it started with The Simpsons, but let's put it in perspective. I Love Lucy. Who was the doofus in I Love Lucy?
Both of them. Oh, she was.
Lucy.
But like she was the lovable doofus.
The thing is that she was like very lovable and very loving.
And she was trying really hard. But they never made fun of her the way that they do the male characters. Right. And
in I Love Raymond, they put Raymond down constantly.
Right.
Like the whole show is a joke on just dumping on Raymond.
Right.
Whereas in I Love Lucy, it's always in how much we love Lucy. Like even when you tell people that like I love Lucy, they smile because they immediately think of like, oh, I love Lucy. She's great.
I think when it comes to comedy, the self-deprecating humor is always best. But like I think about like when you think about like the old 50s and 60s comedies, it was typically the child. Like the child was the doofus, but that was expected.
But that's expected.
Because children are inherently stupid. Or not that they're stupid. They're
ignorant.
They're inherently ignorant because they haven't lived yet.
Right.
They haven't done things. So they make a mistake, and then the parents kind of have to go and teach them a lesson at the end.
Yeah.
And you had a loving mother and a competent dad at home.
Right, and that is a very loving mother, competent dad. That dynamic works. It worked in the 50s, but in Seventh Heaven, that worked, and that's a modern show.
Right, but then I think about like in the 80s, it became more of the trope of like some of the hijinks came in either them being a single parent household or sharing custody between the two. That became the joke.
Sure.
The single parentness, because divorce is on the race. So like the dad or the mom or both are dealing with the circumstance, like situational comedy, the situation of like it's not that they're incompetent, it's just that like there's hijinks because there's lack of communication between these two things, and you still have the child. By the time you get into the 90s, it really becomes the dad's incompetent, the mom's still staying with him. We're not talking about divorce. So it's almost like because divorce came off the table, the implication is the woman is in hell, the man's a doofus.
Yes.
You should get that. Like the divorce rate, I would imagine, just skyrocketed from there, because it's teaching women this is who your husband is. Every stupid thing that
Yes.
he does is this. Don't be like, there's that fear of being stuck as
in a marriage with an idiot, because
Right.
even what's that other, like Malcolm in the Middle,
Right.
is another classic example of like the Simpsons model,
Right.
where the dad is a doofus. It's not necessarily that the mom is in his league or like a little. It's not that she's like inherently better, but it's just that he's so stupid.
Right.
And it's like, why are you perpetuating this ideal?
Because here's the thing, men and women inherently don't communicate the same way. I'm not trying to
It's
make
empirically
it that's empirically true. There is such thing as male and female brain. It drives me insane when the feminists are like, men and women are the same, there is no difference. And I'm like, well, empirically, like physically that's not true, but like even psychologically, the way that we're wired, the way that hormones affect brain function, the way developmental structures happen, there is such a thing, or at least there used to be. You can look it up. It's probably like a dinosaur now.
Well, I mean, that's if you're still allowed to look it up.
Right, but there's such a thing in psychiatry and in psychology of male and female brain, and like different traits that they had. I remember, being trained in this and like learning about it, and most women and most men follow that. There are outliers. There are people who have a little bit more of the other in them, sure, but like for the most part, there is male and female features, even when you talk about how the brain functions and stores and processes information. And when you have men and women living together, there's going to be conflict from that. So, like every relationship, there are arguments, there are fights, and a lot of that comes down when we have arguments, and we do, and we sit down and like we calm down and we start talking about things, and we realize it's really just a communication error.
It really is. And I think you and I use different words,
right.
But like by and large, men are silo thinkers.
Right.
They think in a silo, and I want to say you use a different word. I think you say buckets. Or
we have boxes.
Boxes, that's the word you use. And so like when I was learning about this, the word that was introduced was silos. Like men think in silos, and if it's in the silo, you're great. If it's outside the silo, you need to change the subject because... It doesn't jive.
Yeah, when you talk, this is a different box.
It's a different box.
Right.
And then like women are more
yarn. It's the way I
use say yarn, and I'm like bubbles because when I think of bubbles and bubbles like stick together. But they're all connected.
Well, I don't think of bubbles though, because usually they pop if too many of them get together. Whereas yarn is just like there's a ball of yarn and it's all
tangled.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. You really think it's tangled? It's not organized.
It's not intertwined. Yeah, it's a mess.
It's a mess.
It needs to be put in a box.
Whereas I'm like, this is perfectly organized. Don't mess with my yarn, and you're like, yeah. But like that's a thing. Like that's how, by and large, most men are box silo thinkers, and women are bubble yarn thinkers. Like that's
women tend to think in details. Men tend to think in concepts. Like it's not a, I'm not trying to be like
it's
again
just
like
a thing.
Right, and just because you're outside of the norm, and that doesn't mean there's anything negative. Like you are who you are, and we all are. The universal singular? Right. Do you know have you ever heard that term, the universal singular?
I've heard it a few times.
So what it means is that like there's universal truths, like you are a woman, you are Hispanic, you're all those things, but you're also you.
Right.
So like you can't be you without being Hispanic, without being a woman, without being from your generation, with all the details, and yet you're you.
Right.
So like you're not indicative of all other women. You're not indicative of all other Spanish women. You're not indicative of all whatever. You're you. But at the same time, you can't, take you without all of those things.
Sure. I mean, that makes perfect sense because you are an amalgamation of your environment, experiences, thoughts, feelings, the way that you respond to things. Like
there's universal truths, but they're singularly you.
Right.
As an individual, as everyone is. But yeah, I don't remember where we're going with that.
I mean, to wrap up our Guardians of the Galaxy,
Yeah.
And to be honest, this review is very much indicative of the way that Guardians of the Galaxy ran as a movie. It was a whole lot of crap in the sense that, like, it was just a whole lot of scenes and a whole lot of action sequences and, like, big concepts and little concepts. And somehow they tied it all together into a very, very enjoyable experience.
Right.
But it was all very, like, removable. Like it was very forgettable in the sense that like once you walked out of the theater,
Yeah.
you were like, I don't really know exactly what I watched,
But I'm smiling.
But I'm smiling, and it was great.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of dog humor, and like there's the universal things of like, you know, a dog that like is always trying to please. And
yeah, like I'm a good dog.
Yeah, and like, you know, I'm trying to remember some of the other parts of it, but like.
Well, then there was like the whole like animal, like, you know, the puppy, like
right.
You pick up stray animals, and there was the adult character, not adult, the adult child trope,
right.
Like where you've just got like this tag along.
Right. Here's the thing though that I feel like that I really didn't like about the film. Is it wants everyone to identify with the broken animals. And here's the thing, everyone needs to be a victim, because if you're not a victim, you're a perpetrator.
And you're right. That's one aspect of this new social justice world that I really hate, is that everyone is a victim and we all have trauma and we all need to go see a counselor or a therapist to talk about and deal with our
Buddhism.
trauma.
It's Buddhism. It's what like I've actually been reading a fair amount of spirituality talking about trauma and getting the death of the ego is what a lot of them call it. So the death of the self, getting rid of the singular of the universal singular. They're trying to get rid of the singular so that everyone is the universal.
And to me that is just on the face fundamentally wrong in the sense that you are you. Mm-hmm. There is no other you.
God made you with a plan.
With a plan and a purpose.
Right.
And I hate to say that you are special, because if everyone is special, then no one is special.
Right.
But what I mean is that every person is singularly themselves.
Correct.
There is no other Amy that is exactly a carbon copy of my genetics and experiences and all the things that make me me.
Sure.
But that's not to say that I'm so unique that I'm outside of humanity.
Right.
Like I'm a citizen of humanity. Like I am here, and so I don't need to share in this collective trauma.
Sure.
To like gain entrance to this, you know, citizenship. Like I hold up my trauma card so that I can please be a citizen of the trauma universe.
Right. I mean, because if you're not traumatized in some way and willing to play the victim card, then you are the traumatizer. Exactly.
And that is what I can't get behind that.
Right.
Like that just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. So next week or Friday or whatever, I already know what I want to talk about next.
Oh, okay. Are we going to write it down so we don't forget? Because we do that often.
No, I feel like we say it, we'll remember.
Okay.
So, but what I want to talk about is the 50% rule for men.
50% rule for men.
Yes.
Do I know what that? I don't know what that is.
I've talked about this beforehand. That only about 50%.
Gotcha. I'm on board.
But only about 50% of men are attractive to
reproducing women. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that the idea of men and women's dating cycles are completely different experiences based on that. The other thing I actually want to talk to you about, which I think we may have hit on the first episode, but I wanted to go into more detail, was actually the alcohol gene and how it's perceived my perception on things. So alcoholism and social engineering.
Yeah, there we go.